Greetings, brave warriors and shield maidens. If you seek the strength and wisdom of the ancient Vikings, you've come to the right place. Don't waste time. Subscribe to the channel now and join our horde to strengthen this community of true Vikings. As you can see, our channel is new, so your subscription is crucial to our growth. If you're a true fan of the Vikings, show your support. Let the power of the Viking axe guide your hand to click the like button, and in the comments, tell us which city you're watching from so we know where in the world our stories are reaching, all because the sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the bustling camp. Kjell stood atop a small hill, his keen eyes surveying the scene before him. His men moved with purpose, sharpening blades, mending armor, and discussing tactics in hushed tones. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew a battle was coming. As Kjell watched, his gaze settled on Einar, a soldier who had been with the clan for nearly 5 years. Something about Einar's movements caught Kjell's attention. The man seemed distracted. His hands fumbled with the straps of his armor, and his eyes darted around nervously. Odd, Kjell muttered to himself. He had always known Einar to be steady and focused, especially on the eve of battle. Deciding to investigate further, Kjell made his way down the hill, nodding to his men as he passed. As he approached Einar, the soldier quickly straightened up, offering a forced smile. "Kjell, I didn't see you there," Einar said, his voice a touch too high. Kjell clapped a hand on Einar's shoulder, feeling the man tense beneath his touch. "How are the preparations coming along, Einar? Ready for tomorrow?" Einar nodded vigorously. Of course. Just making sure everything's in order." Kjell held the man's gaze for a moment longer than necessary, noting the beads of sweat forming on his brow despite the cool evening air. "Good man. We'll need everyone at their best." As Kjell walked away, his mind churned with possibilities. Could it be mere nerves? Or was there something more sinister at play? The leader's thoughts drifted to past battles, to the victories that had forged his clan into the formidable force it was today. He remembered the trust that had bloomed between him and his men, cultivated through shared hardships and triumphs. "My lord," a voice interrupted his reverie. It was Astrid, his most trusted scout. "We've intercepted some strange messages. I think you should see them." Kjell followed Astrid to her tent, where she produced several scraps of parchment. As he read them, his brow furrowed deeply. "These speak of an attack," he murmured, "but the details, they don't match our intelligence." Astrid nodded grimly. "That's what worried me. Either our information is wrong or someone is feeding false information to the enemy," Kjell finished. He met Astrid's eyes, seeing his own concern mirrored there. "Keep this quiet for now. I need to think." As night fell, Kjell sought out his most trusted advisor, an old warrior named Bjorn. They met in Kjell's tent, away from prying eyes and ears. "Bjorn, old friend," Kjell began, "I fear we may have a traitor in our midst." Bjorn's weathered face grew serious. "That's a heavy accusation, Kjell. What makes you think so?" Kjell recounted his observations of Einar and the intercepted messages. Bjorn listened intently, stroking his gray beard. "It's not much to go on," Bjorn admitted, "but I trust your instincts. What do you plan to do?" Kjell paced the length of the tent. "For now, we watch and wait. If there is a traitor, we need to catch them in the act. Spread the word quietly to our most loyal. Tell them to keep their eyes open for anything unusual." Bjorn nodded, rising to leave. "And the battle plans?" "We proceed as if nothing has changed," Kjell said firmly. "But be ready for anything." As Bjorn left, Kjell felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him. The trust he had built with his clan over years could be shattered in an instant if he was wrong about this. But if he was right and did nothing... The next morning, Kjell called a clan meeting. The air was tense as everyone gathered, sensing that something was amiss. "My brothers and sisters," Kjell began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Tomorrow we face our enemies in battle, but today we face a different kind of threat. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kjell's eyes scanned their faces, searching for any sign of guilt or fear. "There are whispers of treachery among us," he continued. "I do not say this lightly, nor do I accuse anyone without proof. But we must be vigilant. Our strength has always been in our unity, in the trust we place in one another." He paused, letting his words sink in. In the silence, he could almost feel the tension crackling in the air. "If anyone has information about a possible betrayal, come to me or Bjorn in private. Your words will be heard in confidence." As the meeting dispersed, Kjell overheard snippets of conversation. "A traitor? Here? Impossible. Who could it be? I've always said we shouldn't trust outsiders." Kjell sighed inwardly. This was exactly what he had feared. The seeds of doubt and suspicion taking root among his people. As the day wore on, Kjell found himself second-guessing every interaction, every glance. Was that whispered conversation between two soldiers innocent strategy discussion, or something more sinister? Did that nervous laugh hide guilty knowledge? By evening, the camp was a cauldron of barely suppressed tension. Arguments broke out over minor issues, and Kjell had to intervene several times to keep the peace. As he sat by the central fire, staring into the flames, Astrid approached him once more. "My lord," she said quietly, "the men are divided on our battle strategy. Some are pushing for a more aggressive approach, while others insist we stick to the original plan." Kjell rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. "And what do you think, Astrid?" She hesitated before answering. I think the disagreement itself might be part of the traitor's plan. Keep us arguing amongst ourselves, make us weak and distracted before the battle." Kjell nodded slowly. "You may be right. But how do we counter it without knowing who we can trust?" Astrid had no answer for him, and they sat in troubled silence as the night deepened around them. Later, in the privacy of his tent, Kjell pored over maps and battle plans, trying to anticipate every possible outcome. If there was indeed a traitor, how much did the enemy know? How could he turn this situation to his advantage? As he worked, a cold realization settled in his gut. Tomorrow's battle would be fought on two fronts, against the external enemy and the hidden threat within, and the stakes had never been higher. Kjell extinguished his lamp and lay down, though he knew sleep would be elusive. In the darkness, he made a silent vow. He would root out this betrayal, no matter the cost. And when he found the traitor, they would learn why Kjell's clan had thrived where others had fallen. For Kjell was not just a leader in times of victory. He was a protector, a unifier, and above all, a survivor. And he would do whatever it took to ensure his clan's survival, even if it meant facing the darkest aspects of trust and loyalty. As he finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Kjell's last thoughts were of the battle to come, not just with swords and shields, but with wits and will. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the camp as Kjell prepared for his secret mission. He had volunteered for the night patrol, raising a few eyebrows among his men, but none dared question their leader's decisions. As he fastened his cloak and checked his weapons, Kjell's eyes never left the figure of Einar, the soldier whose behavior had first aroused his suspicions. "Ready for patrol, Einar?" Kjell called out, his voice carefully casual. Einar startled slightly, then nodded. "Yes, my lord, though I must admit I'm surprised to see you joining us tonight." Kjell shrugged, a wry smile on his face. "Even leaders need to stretch their legs sometimes. Besides, it's good to remind myself of what I ask of my men." As they set out into the darkness, Kjell kept Einar in his peripheral vision. The man seemed on edge, his hand constantly straying to a small pouch at his belt. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the occasional hoot of an owl. About an hour into their patrol, Einar cleared his throat. "My lord, if you don't mind, I need to relieve myself. I'll just be a moment." Kjell nodded, his suspicions growing. "Of course, don't stray too far." As soon as Einar disappeared into the shadows of the forest, Kjell moved silently after him. Years of hunting and warfare had honed his stealth, and he moved like a ghost through the underbrush, He followed Einar deeper into the forest, well beyond where one would normally go for a quick stop. Finally, Einar came to a halt in a small clearing. Kjell crouched behind a large oak, watching intently. Einar looked around nervously, then approached a gnarled old tree. To Kjell's surprise, the soldier reached into a hollow in the trunk and pulled out a small scroll. He quickly replaced it with another from the pouch at his belt. A message drop, Kjell whispered to himself, his worst fears confirmed. Just as Einar was about to leave, a twig snapped in the darkness. Both Kjell and Einar tensed, hands moving to their weapons. From the shadows emerged a figure in a dark cloak, hood pulled low over their face. "You're late," the hooded figure hissed, voice barely above a whisper. Einar bowed his head. "I apologize. It was difficult to get away. Kjell suspects something." The hooded figure cursed softly. "Then we must move quickly. What news do you bring?" As Einar began to speak in hushed tones, Kjell strained to hear. He caught fragments about troop movements, supply lines, and battle plans. His blood ran cold as he realized just how much information had been compromised. "And what of Kjell himself?" the hooded figure asked. Einar hesitated. "He's unpredictable. I can't always anticipate his moves." The figure nodded. "Keep watching him closely. Our allies need to know his weaknesses if we're to succeed." As they continued to talk, Kjell's mind raced. He needed to hear more, to understand the full scope of this betrayal. Slowly, carefully, he inched closer. Suddenly, a night bird called out, startling Kjell. His foot slipped on a moss-covered root, sending a shower of leaves rustling to the ground. The conversation in the clearing stopped abruptly. "What was that?" the hooded figure demanded. Einar drew his sword. "I'll check. It's probably just an animal." Kjell's heart pounded as he pressed himself against the tree trunk. He could hear Einar's footsteps approaching, the crunch of leaves growing louder. In a split-second decision, Kjell reached down and picked up a stone, tossing it further into the forest. The stone clattered against a tree, drawing Einar's attention away. "Just a deer, I think," Einar called back to his conspirator. "We've lingered too long," the hooded figure said. "Remember your task. We'll meet again in 3 days." Kjell held his breath as Einar passed within arm's reach of his hiding spot. Once the footsteps faded, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. But the danger wasn't over. He still had to make it back to camp without arousing suspicion. As he crept through the forest, Kjell's mind whirled with the implications of what he'd witnessed. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. And who was this mysterious hooded figure? A spy from an enemy clan? Or someone closer to home? By the time Kjell reached the edge of the camp, he saw Einar had already returned. The traitor was speaking with another soldier, laughing casually as if he hadn't just committed high treason. "Ah, there you are, my lord," Einar called out as Kjell approached. "I was beginning to worry." Kjell forced a smile. "No need for concern. I just wanted to check a bit further out. All quiet?" Einar nodded. "As a grave, my lord." The irony of the phrase wasn't lost on Kjell. He bid the men good night and retreated to his tent, his mind churning with plans and suspicions. Once alone, Kjell paced the length of his tent, debating his next move. Who could he trust with this information? Bjorn, his old friend and advisor? Astrid, his keen-eyed scout? Or should he keep this knowledge to himself for now? The wrong move could alert the traitors and undo any advantage his discovery had given him. But keeping silent meant facing this threat alone, and Kjell knew all too well the dangers of isolation. As dawn broke, Kjell had come no closer to a decision. He emerged from his tent, exhausted but alert, to find the camp already stirring. His men greeted him with respect, but he couldn't help wondering how many more traitors lurked among them. Bjorn approached, concern etched on his weathered face. "You look troubled, Kjell. Did something happen during the night patrol?" For a moment, Kjell was tempted to confide everything, but caution held his tongue. "Nothing specific, old friend, just a feeling. Keep your eyes open today, will you? Bjorn nodded, understanding the unspoken request. Always do, my lord. Always do. As Bjorn walked away, Kjell's gaze fell on Einar, who was busy sharpening his sword. The traitor looked up, meeting Kjell's eyes, and smiled innocently. Kjell nodded in acknowledgement, his face betraying nothing of the turmoil within. He turned away, moving through the camp with purpose, though his destination was unclear even to himself. The weight of his discovery pressed down on him, a secret burden he alone could bear for now. But Kjell was a leader, forged in the fires of countless battles. He would find a way through this darkness, expose the rot that threatened his clan, and emerge stronger for it. As he walked, Kjell made a silent vow. He would root out this betrayal, no matter the cost. And when the time came, those who had broken faith would learn why Kjell's name was spoken with both respect and fear throughout the land. The day stretched ahead, full of potential dangers and difficult decisions. Kjell sat alone in his tent, the weight of his recent discovery pressing heavily upon him. The flickering light of a single candle cast dancing shadows on the canvas walls as he pondered his next move. He knew he had to act, to root out the traitor in their midst, but doing so without tipping his hand would require cunning and patience. After hours of deliberation, a plan began to form in his mind. It was risky, but if executed properly, it could expose the traitor without alerting them to his suspicions. As dawn broke, Kjell summoned his most trusted advisors, Bjorn, the grizzled veteran, and Astrid, his sharp-eyed scout. "I have a task for you both," Kjell began, his voice low and serious. "What I'm about to tell you must not leave this tent." Bjorn and Astrid exchanged glances, then nodded solemnly. "I believe we have a traitor among us," Kjell continued, watching their reactions carefully. Astrid's eyes widened in shock, while Bjorn's face darkened with anger. "Who?" Bjorn growled, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. Kjell held up a hand to calm him. "That's what we need to find out. And to do that, we're going to set a trap." He outlined his plan to them. They would create false battle plans, each with a slightly different detail, and distribute them among key members of the clan. If the enemy's movements changed to counteract one of these fake strategies, they would know which version had been leaked, and by extension who the traitor was. "It's clever," Astrid mused, "but risky. What if the enemy acts on this false information and catches us unprepared?" Kjell nodded, acknowledging her concern. "That's why we'll be prepared for all scenarios. Our true plans will remain known only to us three." Over the next few days, Kjell, Bjorn, and Astrid carefully disseminated the false information. They held strategy meetings, left documents accidentally visible, and engaged in loud discussions about their supposed plans within earshot of various clan members. To Einar, Kjell's primary suspect, he revealed a plan to attack the enemy's western flank at dawn. To Halfdan, a relatively new recruit, he mentioned a nighttime ambush from the east. 3 other variations were spread among other potential suspects. As the days passed, Kjell found himself scrutinizing every interaction, every glance. The weight of suspicion was a heavy burden, and he felt the strain of maintaining a facade of normalcy. One evening, as Kjell was discussing patrol rotations with a group of warriors, Astrid burst into the gathering, her face flushed with exertion. "My lord," she panted, "urgent news from our scouts." Kjell excused himself and followed Astrid to a private corner of the camp. "What is it?" he asked, his heart racing. Astrid's eyes gleamed with a mix of triumph and concern. "The enemy forces are on the move. They've shifted their defenses to the west and doubled their patrols at dawn." Kjell's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the confirmation he had been waiting for. The enemy was reacting to the false information he had given to Einar. "Are you certain?" he asked, needing to hear it again. Astrid nodded gravely. "I saw it with my own eyes, my lord. They're preparing for an attack that will never come." Kjell's mind raced. Einar's betrayal was now confirmed, but the implications sent a chill down his spine. Einar had been with the clan for years, had fought beside Kjell in countless battles. How long had he been a traitor? What other secrets had he divulged? As Kjell pondered these troubling questions, a commotion arose from the edge of the camp. Shouts of alarm pierced the evening air, followed by the clash of steel on steel. "We're under attack," came a cry from the perimeter. Kjell's hand flew to his sword. "Sound the alarm," he ordered Astrid. "Rally the men." As chaos erupted around them, Kjell's mind whirled. This attack was unexpected. It didn't align with any of the false information they had planted. Had there been another leak? Or was this simply bad timing? There was no time to dwell on it now. Kjell sprinted towards the sound of battle, shouting orders as he went. Warriors poured out of tents, grabbing weapons and forming defensive lines. In the fray, Kjell caught sight of Einar, fighting ferociously against the invaders. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. Could he have been wrong about Einar's betrayal? But there was no time for second-guessing. The enemy had penetrated their outer defenses and was pushing towards the heart of the camp. Kjell threw himself into the fight, his sword a blur of motion as he cut down foe after foe. "Hold the line," he roared, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "Push them back." For hours, the battle raged. Kjell lost track of time, focused solely on survival and protecting his people. As dawn broke, the tide finally turned. The enemy, realizing they had lost the element of surprise, began to retreat. As the last of the invaders fled into the forest, Kjell allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. The camp was in disarray, with wounded warriors being tended to and fires being extinguished. But they had held. Bjorn approached, his armor splattered with blood. "We've driven them off, my lord, but our losses are significant." Kjell nodded grimly. "Gather the wounded. I want a full assessment of our situation as soon as possible." As Bjorn moved off to carry out his orders, Kjell's gaze fell on Einar, who was helping a wounded comrade to the healer's tent. The man he now knew to be a traitor had fought bravely in defense of the camp. The contradiction made Kjell's head spin. For now, his plans to expose Einar would have to wait. The safety and recovery of his people had to take priority. But Kjell knew he couldn't let his guard down. The web of lies and betrayal was more complex than he had initially believed, and he would need all his wits about him to unravel it. As he moved through the camp, assessing damage and reassuring his people, Kjell's mind never stopped working. He would find a way to root out the traitor, or traitors, in their midst. But he would have to be cautious. One wrong move could spell disaster for everything he had built. The attack had forced him to postpone his investigation, but it had also steeled his resolve. Kjell knew that the safety of his clan depended on exposing the rot within, and he would do whatever it took to see that done, no matter the personal cost. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting light on the aftermath of the battle, Kjell stood atop a small hill overlooking the camp. His people moved below, tending to the wounded, repairing defenses, and preparing for whatever might come next. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, there was a resilience in their actions that filled Kjell with pride. He took a deep breath, letting the cool morning air fill his lungs. The path ahead was fraught with danger and difficult choices, but Kjell was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The clash of steel and the cries of warriors filled the air as Kjell's clan engaged in fierce combat with their enemies. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of mud, blood, and swirling fog, making it difficult to distinguish friend from foe. Kjell fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his sword singing as it cut through the air, felling opponents with each precise strike. Despite the intensity of the battle, Kjell's keen eyes never stopped scanning the field, watching not only for enemy movements, but also for any sign of the traitor he knew lurked among his own men. As he parried a thrust from an enemy blade, something caught his attention from the corner of his eye. There, on a small rise overlooking the battlefield, stood Einar. But instead of joining the fray, he was making a series of complex hand gestures towards the enemy lines. Kjell's blood ran cold as he realized what he was witnessing. Einar was signaling to the enemy, likely relaying crucial information about their formation and tactics. Without hesitation, Kjell cut down his current opponent and began fighting his way towards Einar. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of rage, betrayal, and grim determination fueling his movements. As he approached, Einar turned and saw him coming. The traitor's eyes widened in shock, realizing he had been caught in the act. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as their gazes locked across the battlefield. Then Einar turned to flee. "Einar!" Kjell's voice boomed across the chaos, causing nearby warriors to turn and look. "Face me, you coward!" Einar hesitated, then slowly turned back. His hand went to his sword, drawing it with a resigned expression. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Kjell," he said, loud enough to be heard over the din of battle. Kjell advanced, his own weapon at the ready. Around them, the battle seemed to recede, warriors from both sides pausing to watch the confrontation unfolding between their leader and one of his trusted men. "How long?" Kjell demanded, circling Einar warily. "How long have you been betraying us?" "Betraying me?" Einar's face twisted with a mix of emotions. Guilt, defiance, and something else Kjell couldn't quite place. "Longer than you know," he admitted. "But it's not what you think, Kjell. There's so much more at stake here than just our clan." Kjell's eyes narrowed. "Explain. Quickly." Einar glanced around, aware of the growing audience. Both their clan members and enemy warriors had formed a loose circle around them, the larger battle momentarily forgotten in light of this unexpected drama. "It's not just me," Einar said, his voice low but carrying in the sudden hush. "There are others, in every clan. We're part of something bigger, something that could change everything." Kjell's mind raced. A conspiracy involving multiple clans? The implications were staggering. "Who?" he demanded. "Who else is involved?" Einar shook his head. "I can't tell you that. But know this, Kjell. What we're doing, it's for the good of all our people. The endless wars, the bloodshed, we can put an end to it all." "By betraying your own?" Kjell spat, his grip tightening on his sword. "Sometimes," Einar said softly, "sacrifice is necessary for the greater good." In that moment, Kjell realized he faced a decision that would change everything. He could strike Einar down here and now, ending the immediate threat to his clan. But in doing so, he might lose his only link to this larger conspiracy. The battlefield held its breath as Kjell visibly wrestled with his decision. His men watched, waiting to see how their leader would handle this betrayal. The enemy forces, too, seemed unsure whether to press their attack or wait for the outcome of this unexpected turn of events. Kjell's mind raced through the possibilities. If he spared Einar, he risked appearing weak in front of his men. But if he killed him, he might never uncover the full extent of the plot against them. "Kjell," Einar said, breaking the tense silence, "I know I've betrayed your trust, but give me a chance to explain everything. What I know could save not just our clan, but all the clans." Kjell's jaw clenched. He could see the shock and confusion on the faces of his warriors. They were looking to him, waiting for his decision. Whatever he did next would set the course for everything that followed. In a lightning-fast move, Kjell lunged forward. His blade flashed in the dim light, and for a moment, everyone thought he had run Einar through. But instead, the tip of his sword rested against Einar's throat, drawing just a drop of blood. "You will tell me everything," Kjell growled, loud enough for all to hear. "Every name, every plan. And if I sense even a hint of deception, I will end you where you stand. Do you understand?" Einar swallowed hard, the movement causing the blade to nick his skin slightly. "I understand," he said hoarsely. Kjell turned to address his warriors, keeping his sword at Einar's throat. "This man has betrayed us," he announced, "but his treachery may run deeper than we know. I will get the truth from him, and then we will deal with all those who would threaten our clan." A murmur ran through the crowd. Kjell could see a mix of emotions on his warriors' faces: anger at the betrayal, confusion at his decision to spare Einar for now, and a growing determination to uncover the full extent of the threat against them. Suddenly, a cry went up from the enemy lines. Their leader, seeing the disarray in Kjell's forces, had ordered a renewed attack. The spell of the confrontation was broken as both sides scrambled to reform their lines. "Bind him," Kjell ordered, shoving Einar towards two of his most trusted warriors. "Guard him with your lives. We'll deal with this after we've won this battle." As his men rushed to obey, Kjell turned to face the oncoming enemy force. He raised his sword high, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. "Warriors of the clan, today we fight not just for victory, but for truth. Let every stroke of your blade be a blow against treachery, for the clan." A roar went up from his forces as they surged forward to meet the enemy charge. Kjell led from the front, his mind still reeling from the revelations but his purpose clear. He would win this battle, and then he would unravel the conspiracy that threatened everything he held dear. As he clashed with the first enemy warrior, Kjell caught a glimpse of Einar being led away, surrounded by guards. The traitor's face was a mask of resignation and something that looked almost like relief. The battle raged on, taking on a new intensity. Kjell's warriors fought with renewed vigor, their anger at the betrayal fueling their strength. The enemy, sensing the change in the tide of battle, began to falter. As the sun began to set, painting the battlefield in hues of red and gold, Kjell stood victorious amidst the aftermath of the fight. His clan had prevailed, pushing back the enemy forces and securing their position. But Kjell knew that the real battle was just beginning. As he looked around at his battered but unbowed warriors, he steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The conspiracy Einar had hinted at could shake the foundations of their entire world. With a deep breath, Kjell sheathed his sword and began issuing orders for the care of the wounded and the securing of their position. But in the back of his mind, his thoughts were already turning to the interrogation to come. The truth would be uncovered, no matter the cost. The pre-dawn air was thick with tension as Kjell stood before his assembled warriors. The information extracted from Einar had been as shocking as it was valuable, revealing not only enemy positions, but also the extent of the conspiracy that threaded through multiple clans. Now Kjell prepared to use this knowledge to turn the tide of war. "My brothers and sisters in arms," Kjell began, his voice carrying across the silent ranks. "Today we fight not just for victory, but for the very future of our people. The enemy thinks they know our plans, but we will show them how wrong they are." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kjell could see the doubt in some faces, the lingering distrust sown by Einar's betrayal. He pressed on. "I know many of you question my decisions, especially after recent events. But I ask you now to trust me one more time. The plan I'm about to lay out may seem mad, but it's our best chance at not just winning this battle, but ending this war." Kjell proceeded to outline his strategy, one that flew in the face of traditional warfare tactics. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on as expected, they would split their forces. A small elite group would make a daring raid on the enemy's rear supply lines, while the main force would appear to retreat, drawing the enemy into a carefully prepared trap. As he spoke, Kjell watched his warriors' reactions closely. Some nodded in understanding, seeing the genius in the unconventional approach. Others looked skeptical, even alarmed. Bjorn, his old friend and advisor, stepped forward. "My lord, with all due respect, this plan is extremely risky. If even one part goes wrong, we could be completely destroyed." Kjell nodded gravely. "You're right, Bjorn. It is risky, but it's a risk we must take. The enemy outnumbers us, and they think they know our every move. This is our only chance to catch them off guard." Astrid, his keen-eyed scout, spoke up next. "I volunteer to lead the raid on their supply lines. My team and I can move quickly and quietly." "Thank you, Astrid," Kjell said, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Choose your best scouts. You'll need to be swift and silent." As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the encampment, Kjell's forces moved into position. The air was thick with anticipation and nervous energy. Kjell could feel the weight of his clan's future resting on his shoulders. The battle began as expected, with the enemy advancing confidently, clearly believing they knew Kell's strategy. But as Kell's main force began their feigned retreat, confusion spread through the enemy ranks. Kell rode along the lines, shouting encouragement to his warriors. "Hold steady. Trust in the plan. Each step back draws them further into our trap." For hours, the battle raged. Kell's forces gave ground steadily, drawing the enemy deeper into the valley. Doubt began to creep into the eyes of some of Kell's warriors. They were unused to retreating, and the strain of going against their instincts was showing. "My lord," a young warrior named Halvor called out, panic edging his voice. "We're being pushed back too far. We should stand and fight." Kell rode to Halvor's side, his voice low but firm. "Hold the line, Halvor. Trust me. The tide will turn soon." Just when it seemed Kell's forces could retreat no further, a horn blast echoed across the battlefield. It was the signal from Astrid's team. They had successfully disrupted the enemy's supply lines. Kell's voice roared across the field. "Now, spring the trap." With a collective war cry, Kell's warriors surged forward, catching the enemy completely by surprise. At the same time, hidden archers unleashed a hail of arrows from the valley's rim, raining death upon the confused enemy forces. The battle's tide turned dramatically. The enemy, caught between Kjell's reinvigorated main force and Astrid's harrying raids on their rear, began to falter. Their carefully laid plans were in tatters, and chaos spread through their ranks. As the sun reached its zenith, Kjell found himself face to face with the enemy commander. The two leaders locked eyes across the battlefield, a moment of understanding passing between them. Then they charged at each other, their clash symbolizing the pivotal moment of the battle. Steel rang against steel as Kjell and the enemy commander dueled. Around them, the battle hung in the balance. Kjell could feel the eyes of both armies upon them, knowing that the outcome of this duel could decide the day. With a clever feint and a powerful strike, Kjell disarmed his opponent. The enemy commander fell to his knees, looking up at Kjell with a mix of fear and respect. "Do it," the commander said, baring his neck. "End it." Kjell raised his sword, but then paused. He thought of Einar's words about ending the cycle of violence. In that moment, he made a decision that would reshape the future of their clans. "No," Kjell said, lowering his weapon. "Enough blood has been spilled. Call off your forces. Let's end this war here and now." A hush fell over the battlefield as warriors on both sides watched this unexpected turn of events. The enemy commander, after a moment of shock, nodded slowly and called for his forces to stand down. As word spread of the enemy's surrender, cheers erupted from Kjell's warriors. They had achieved a victory beyond their wildest hopes. But Kjell could see that not everyone shared in the jubilation. Some of his warriors looked confused, even angry at the decision to spare the enemy commander. Kjell had broken with tradition, and he knew there would be consequences. As the dust settled and the wounded were tended to, Kjell called his advisors together. The victory celebration around them was subdued, tinged with uncertainty. "You've won us the day, my lord," Bjorn said, his voice low. "But at what cost? Many of our warriors don't understand why you spared the enemy leader." Astrid nodded in agreement. "They're calling it weakness, Kjell. They say a true leader would have finished the job." Kjell sighed heavily. "I know. But if we're ever to break this cycle of war, someone has to take the first step. We've won a great victory today, not just on the battlefield, but for the future of all our clans." As night fell, Kjell walked among his warriors. He could feel the change in the air. Where once there had been unquestioning loyalty, now he sensed doubt and division. Some warriors hailed him as a visionary, while others muttered about tradition and strength. Kjell knew that the real battle was just beginning. He had won the war, but now he faced the perhaps even greater challenge of winning the peace. The unity of his clan, forged through countless battles, was now at risk. As he reached the edge of the camp, Kjell looked out over the battlefield, now silent under the starry sky. The victory had been achieved, but at a great cost, not in lives this time, but in the trust and unity of his people. Kjell squared his shoulders, ready to face the challenges ahead. He had changed the tide of war, but now he would need to navigate the treacherous waters of peace. It would require all of his skill, wisdom, and leadership to keep his clan together in the face of this new future. As he turned back to the camp, Kjell whispered a quiet prayer to the gods. The victory celebration had long since faded, leaving behind a camp shrouded in an uneasy quiet. Kjell paced restlessly in his tent, the weight of recent events pressing heavily upon him. The revelation of Einar's betrayal and the subsequent battle had left him shaken, his once unshakable trust in his men now fractured. As dawn broke, Kjell emerged from his tent, his eyes darting suspiciously from face to face. Every conversation seemed to halt as he passed, replaced by whispers that prickled at the back of his neck. He couldn't shake the feeling that more traitors lurked among his ranks, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Bjorn," Kjell called out, spotting his old friend and advisor. "Gather the council. We need to discuss new security measures." Bjorn nodded, a look of concern crossing his weathered features. "At once, my lord." Within the hour, Kjell stood before his inner circle, his voice tight with barely contained tension. "From this day forward, we implement new protocols. No one goes anywhere alone. All communications are to be monitored. Any suspicious activity is to be reported immediately." Astrid, usually supportive, spoke up with hesitation. "Kjell, don't you think this might be excessive? Our people have just fought bravely for us. Surely we can trust them." Kjell's eyes flashed. "Trust? Trust is what nearly got us all killed. No, we can't afford to take any chances." As the new measures were put into place, a ripple of discontent spread through the camp. Warriors who had bled for Kjell now found themselves under constant scrutiny. Longtime friends were required to report on each other's movements. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion and resentment. Halvor, the young warrior who had doubted during the battle, approached Kjell one evening. "My lord, the men are uneasy. They feel like prisoners in their own camp." Kjell's response was curt. "Better uneasy than dead, Halvor. These measures are for everyone's protection." But as days turned to weeks, the strain began to show. Loyal soldiers who had once followed Kjell unquestioningly now whispered among themselves, questioning his judgment and stability. One morning, as Kjell conducted his daily inspection of the camp's defenses, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "I'm telling you, he's lost it," a gruff voice said. "The Kjell I followed into battle wouldn't treat his own men like criminals." "Quiet, you fool," another voice hissed. "Do you want to end up like Einar?" Kjell's hand tightened on his sword hilt, ready to confront the dissenting voices. But before he could step forward, Bjorn's hand fell on his shoulder. "Let it go, my friend," Bjorn said softly. "Confronting them will only make things worse." Kjell shrugged off the hand, his eyes blazing. "You think I should ignore disloyalty in my own ranks?" Bjorn sighed heavily. "I think you should consider that loyalty goes both ways. Your men have always been loyal to you. Perhaps it's time to show some faith in them." Before Kjell could respond, a commotion at the camp's entrance drew their attention. A messenger had arrived bearing news that would add another layer of complexity to Kjell's already precarious situation. "My lord," the messenger said, bowing low, "I bring word from the Ravenclaw clan. They offer an alliance against our common enemies." A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. The Ravenclaw clan had long been rivals, their history with Kjell's people marked by bloodshed and betrayal. An alliance seemed unthinkable. Kjell's eyes narrowed. An alliance? Now? What game are they playing? The messenger shifted uncomfortably under Kjell's intense gaze. "They say the changing times call for new alliances, my lord. Their leader, Sigurd Ravenclaw, requests a meeting to discuss terms." Kjell dismissed the messenger, his mind racing. Could this be a genuine offer of peace? Or was it a trap, another layer of betrayal waiting to ensnare him? As he debated the offer with his advisors, Kjell couldn't shake a nagging suspicion. The timing was too convenient, coming so soon after Einar's betrayal and the subsequent battle. "We should at least hear them out," Astrid argued. "An alliance could bring stability to the region." Bjorn nodded in agreement. It's worth considering, Kjell. We can't stand alone forever. But Kjell's paranoia had taken root deep. And if it's a trap? If they're working with our enemies, waiting for us to lower our guard? The debate raged on, but Kjell had already made up his mind. He would meet with Sigurd Ravenclaw, but not out of any desire for alliance. He needed to look this potential threat in the eye, to search for any sign of deceit. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, a clearing in the forest that separated their territories. Kjell arrived with a heavy guard, his eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of ambush. Sigurd Ravenclaw stepped forward, his hand extended in a gesture of peace. Kjell Ironheart, it's been too long. I'm glad you agreed to this meeting. Kjell ignored the outstretched hand, his voice cold. Let's skip the pleasantries, Sigurd. Why the sudden desire for alliance? Sigurd's smile faltered slightly. As I said in my message, the times are changing. Old rivalries must be set aside if we're to survive the challenges ahead. As Sigurd spoke, Kjell studied him intently, searching for any tell, any sign of deception. And then he saw it. A small gesture, a way of emphasizing certain words that seemed eerily familiar. In a flash, Kjell's mind raced back to his confrontation with Einar. The traitor had used similar mannerisms when speaking of the greater conspiracy. Could it be mere coincidence? Or was there a connection he had missed? Tell me, Sigurd, Kjell said, his voice dangerously quiet. How well did you know Einar? Sigurd's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Einar, I'm not sure I... Don't lie to me, Kjell roared, his hand flying to his sword. I see it now, the connection. You're part of this, aren't you? Part of the conspiracy Einar spoke of. The clearing erupted into chaos. Warriors on both sides drew weapons, tensions that had been simmering for generations threatening to boil over. Kjell, you're making a mistake, Sigurd shouted over the din. There's no conspiracy. We came here in good faith. But Kjell was beyond reason. In his mind, the shadows of doubt had coalesced into a terrifying certainty. Everyone was a potential enemy, every offer of peace a disguised threat. As steel clashed against steel, Kjell found himself isolated, his own men hesitating to follow him into what many saw as madness. The alliance that might have brought peace now lay in tatters, destroyed by the very paranoia it had sought to alleviate. In the midst of the melee, Bjorn fought his way to Kjell's side. My lord, we must withdraw. This is folly. For a moment, clarity cut through Kjell's haze of suspicion. He looked around at the chaos he had unleashed, at the dismay on the faces of his own warriors. What had he done? Fall back, Kjell shouted, his voice hoarse. Fall back to camp. As they retreated, leaving behind a clearing stained with blood and missed opportunity, Kjell felt the weight of his decisions pressing down upon him. He had allowed his fear and distrust to rule him, and in doing so, had perhaps done more damage than any external enemy ever could. Back in the safety of their camp, Kjell stood alone, the sounds of unrest clear even through the walls of his tent. He had sought to protect his people from betrayal, but in his zeal, he had betrayed their trust in him. As night fell, Kjell faced the grim reality of his situation. His paranoia had not only jeopardized a potential alliance, but had driven a wedge between him and his own people. The shadows of doubt he had tried so hard to dispel now loomed larger than ever, threatening to engulf everything he had fought to protect. The air in Kjell's tent was thick with tension as he gathered his most trusted advisors. Bjorn, Astrid, and a handful of others stood in a tight circle, their faces etched with concern. Kjell paced back and forth, his mind racing with a plan that was as brilliant as it was dangerous. I've called you here because I can trust no one else, Kjell began, his voice low and intense. We have traitors in our midst, and I intend to smoke them out. Bjorn stepped forward, his weathered face creased with worry. Kjell, my friend, haven't we been down this road before? Your suspicions nearly tore us apart at the meeting with the Ravenclaw clan. Kjell's eyes flashed with a mix of determination and something darker. This is different, Bjorn. I have a plan that will reveal the true loyalties of every member of our clan. He outlined his scheme. A staged assassination attempt on himself. The reactions of his warriors in that moment of crisis would reveal their true allegiances. Those who rushed to his aid would prove their loyalty, while any who hesitated or seemed pleased by the attack would expose themselves as potential traitors. Astrid's sharp intake of breath cut through the stunned silence that followed. "My lord, this is madness. The risks are too great. What if something goes wrong?" Kjell turned to her, his eyes blazing with conviction. "The risk of doing nothing is far greater. Our clan is fracturing, Astrid. I can feel it. This may be our last chance to unite our people and root out the rot that threatens to destroy us." Despite their misgivings, Kjell's advisors could see the steel in his gaze. They knew there would be no dissuading him from this course of action. Reluctantly, they began to plan the details of the false assassination attempt. As dawn broke the next day, Kjell emerged from his tent, his face a mask of calm determination. He moved through the camp, greeting his warriors as he always did, all the while acutely aware that his every move was part of an elaborate deception. The stage was set for midday when Kjell would address the clan in the central gathering area. As he stood before his people, he could feel the weight of their gazes upon him. Some looked on with admiration, others with suspicion, and still others with a wariness that spoke of the growing divisions within the clan. "My brothers and sisters," Kjell began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "We have faced many challenges together, and there are more yet to come. But I have faith that our unity and strength will see us through." His words were cut short by a sudden commotion at the edge of the crowd. A hooded figure burst through, a gleaming dagger raised high. Time seemed to slow as the assassin charged towards Kjell. In that moment, chaos erupted. Warriors surged forward, some drawing weapons to defend their leader, others frozen in shock. Kjell's trained eye took in every reaction, noting who moved to protect him and who seemed to hesitate. Just as the assassin reached him, Kjell dropped the act. With a swift motion, he disarmed the would-be attacker, revealing to all that it had been a ruse. The hooded figure was none other than one of Kjell's most trusted guards, following the plan to perfection. "Enough!" Kjell's voice thundered across the now silent gathering. "This was a test, one that many of you have failed." The shock on the faces of his clan members quickly turned to a mix of emotions: anger, confusion, and for some, a dawning realization of what had just transpired. Kjell's eyes scanned the crowd, picking out those who had rushed to his defense. "To those who stood ready to give their lives for me, you have my eternal gratitude. Your loyalty is beyond question." But his voice hardened as he continued. "As for the rest of you, your hesitation speaks volumes. In that moment of crisis, your true colors were revealed." The crowd began to murmur, the sound growing like a gathering storm. Kjell could see the clan fracturing before his eyes, just as he had feared. Those he had praised looked on with pride, while others wore expressions of shame or defiance. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the crowd. It was Halvor, the young warrior who had questioned Kjell's decisions in the past. "How dare you?" he shouted, his face red with anger. "You would test our loyalty with trickery and lies. What kind of leader does that make you?" Bjorn stepped forward, placing himself between Kjell and the increasingly agitated crowd. "Calm yourselves. Can't you see this was necessary? Our clan has been infiltrated and—" But his words were drowned out by the growing chorus of dissent. Warriors who had fought side by side for years now turned on each other, accusations and counter-accusations flying. Kjell watched as the clan he had led for so long fractured into factions before his eyes. Those who still believed in him gathered close, forming a protective circle, while others drew back, their faces twisted with distrust and anger. In the midst of the chaos, Astrid fought her way to Kjell's side. "My lord," she said urgently, "this has gone too far. We must do something before blood is shed." Kjell nodded grimly, realizing the full consequences of his actions. He had sought to root out disloyalty, but in doing so, he had sown the seeds of division that now threatened to tear the clan apart. As he prepared to speak again, To try and calm the storm he had unleashed, a horn blast cut through the din. All eyes turned to the camp's entrance, where a scout burst in, his face pale with urgency. "Attack!" the scout cried out. "The Shadowmere clan approaches from the north. They'll be upon us within the hour." The effect was instantaneous. The internal strife that had moments ago threatened to tear the clan apart was suddenly forgotten in the face of this new, external threat. Warriors who had been at each other's throats now turned as one to face the common enemy. Kjell seized the moment, his voice ringing out with authority. "To arms, my brothers and sisters, whatever our differences, we are still one clan. Will you stand with me against this threat?" There was a moment of hesitation, a collective breath held as the clan stood on the precipice of a crucial decision. Then, almost as one, a roar of assent went up. Warriors who had doubted Kjell now raised their weapons in solidarity, the immediate danger overriding their recent grievances. As the clan mobilized for battle, Kjell felt a mix of relief and grim determination. The external threat had, for the moment, united his people, but he knew that the wounds he had inflicted with his test of loyalty would not heal easily. Bjorn approached him as they prepared for the coming battle. "This doesn't erase what happened, Kjell," he said quietly. "When this is over, there will be a reckoning." Kjell nodded, the weight of his decisions heavy upon him. "I know, old friend. But for now, we fight together. Whatever comes after, we'll face it as one clan." As they moved to take their positions, Kjell couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. His plan to root out disloyalty had nearly destroyed the clan, and now an enemy attack might be the very thing to save it. The price of loyalty, he realized, was far higher than he had ever imagined. As the first war cries of the approaching Shadowmere clan reached their ears, Kjell steeled himself for the battle ahead, not just against their external foes, but for the very soul of his clan. With a raised sword and a battle cry, Kjell led his warriors forward, hoping that in the crucible of combat they might forge anew the bonds of trust and loyalty that he had so nearly destroyed. The air was thick with tension as Kjell led his clan towards the battlefield. The sounds of approaching enemy forces grew louder with each passing moment, but the usual pre-battle excitement was tempered by an undercurrent of uncertainty and mistrust. The wounds from Kjell's staged assassination attempt were still fresh, and many warriors cast wary glances at their leader and at each other. As they crested a hill overlooking the valley where they would make their stand, Kjell raised his hand, signaling the clan to halt. He turned to address his warriors, acutely aware of the doubt in many of their eyes. "Brothers and sisters," Kjell began, his voice carrying across the assembled force, "I know that trust between us has been shaken, but now we face a common enemy that threatens everything we hold dear. Today we must set aside our differences and fight as one, or we will surely fall." Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Bjorn, ever loyal, stepped forward. "Kjell speaks true. Whatever grievances we have, they mean nothing if we don't survive this day." But not everyone was convinced. Halvor, the young warrior who had challenged Kjell earlier, spoke up. "And how do we know this isn't another of your tests, Kjell? How can we trust anything you say?" The question hung in the air, and Kjell could see the doubt reflected in many faces. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, the war horns of the Shadowmere clan echoed across the valley. The enemy was upon them. "There's no time for this," Astrid shouted. "To your positions, all of you." As the clan scrambled to form battle lines, Kjell could see the lack of cohesion in their movements. Warriors who had fought side by side for years now hesitated to stand together. The usual fluid coordination of their battle formations was replaced by awkward, disjointed groupings. The first wave of Shadowmere warriors crashed against their lines like a dark tide. Kjell found himself in the thick of the fighting, his sword a blur of motion as he cut down foe after foe. But all around him, he could see his clan struggling. "Watch your left flank," he shouted to a group of warriors who had left a dangerous gap in their defense. They hesitated for a moment, clearly torn between following his command and their lingering distrust. That moment of hesitation cost them dearly. A Shadowmere berserker broke through the gap, his massive axe cleaving through two of Kjell's men before they could react. "No!" Kjell roared, leaping to engage the berserker. As they clashed, he could hear the sounds of his clan faltering all around him. The lack of trust was eroding their effectiveness, and the Shadowmere were exploiting every weakness. As he finally brought down the berserker, Kjell realized that conventional tactics wouldn't win this day. They needed something bold, something that would force the clan to work together. An idea formed in his mind, as brilliant as it was dangerous. "Bjorn," he called out, dispatching another enemy warrior. "To me." His old friend fought his way to Kjell's side, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. "What is it?" Kjell quickly outlined his plan, a daring maneuver that would split their forces, with Kjell leading a small team to flank the enemy while the main force held the line. It was a strategy that required perfect timing and absolute trust between the two groups. Bjorn's eyes widened. "Kjell, that's madness. In our current state, the coordination required." "It's our only chance," Kjell insisted. "Gather Astrid, Halvor, and any others who'll come. We move now." As Bjorn spread the word, Kjell could see the shock and disbelief on the faces of his warriors. He was asking them to trust him completely, to believe that he wouldn't abandon them to save himself. It was a lot to ask after everything that had happened. To his surprise, Halvor was among the first to step forward. "I'll go," the young warrior said, his eyes meeting Kjell's with a mix of defiance and determination. "Someone needs to watch your back." With a nod of gratitude, Kjell led his small team away from the main battle, circling around to strike at the enemy's flank. As they moved, he could hear the sounds of the battle intensifying. His heart raced, knowing that every moment they delayed could mean the difference between victory and annihilation for their clan. Finally in position, Kjell raised his sword, preparing to signal the attack. But as he did, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The Shadowmere, anticipating their strategy, had sent a force to intercept them. They were caught between two enemy forces, with no hope of escape. "We're trapped," Astrid hissed, her bow already nocked and drawn. Kjell's mind raced. There was only one way out, but it would require the ultimate sacrifice. He turned to his companions, his decision made. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "When I give the signal, you will break through their lines and rejoin our main force. I'll create a diversion to cover your escape." Realization dawned on their faces. "No," Bjorn said firmly. "We won't leave you to die." Kjell gripped his old friend's shoulder. "This isn't up for debate. The clan needs you to lead them. This is the only way." Before anyone could protest further, Kjell charged towards the approaching Shadowmere force, his war cry echoing across the battlefield. "For the clan!" he roared, throwing himself into the midst of the enemy. His companions hesitated for a moment, torn between loyalty and obedience. Then, with heavy hearts, they seized the opportunity Kjell had given them, breaking through the distracted enemy lines to rejoin the main battle. From the center of the Shadowmere force, Kjell could see his plan unfolding. His sacrifice had not only saved his companions, but had also drawn a significant portion of the enemy away from the main battle. He fought like a man possessed, each swing of his sword buying more time for his clan. Back on the main battlefield, word of Kjell's sacrifice spread quickly. The effect was electrifying. Warriors who had doubted their leader now fought with renewed vigor, inspired by his selfless act. Halvor, who had made it back to the main force, rallied the clan with a powerful cry. "Kjell fights alone against impossible odds. Will we let him fall? Will we let his sacrifice be in vain?" A resounding no echoed across the battlefield. The clan, once fractured and uncertain, now fought as one, their earlier mistrust forgotten in the face of their leader's courage. As Kjell felt his strength beginning to fade, surrounded by fallen enemies but with more still coming, he allowed himself a small smile. He could hear the tide of battle turning, could feel the renewed spirit of his clan even from a distance. His gambit had worked. Just as he prepared to make his final stand, a familiar war cry reached his ears. To his amazement, he saw Bjorn leading a charge straight towards him, the full might of the clan at his back. "Did you think we'd let you have all the glory?" Bjorn shouted as he cut down the enemies surrounding Kjell. Overwhelmed by the sudden reversal and the loyalty of his clan, Kjell found new strength. Fighting side by side with Bjorn, Astrid, Halvor, and all the warriors he had doubted and who had doubted him, Kjell felt the true spirit of the clan resurge. The Shadowmere, caught off guard by the clan's newfound unity and ferocity, began to falter. What had seemed like certain victory for them turned into a rout. As the last of the enemy fled or fell, a great cheer went up from the clan. Exhausted but victorious, Kjell found himself surrounded by his warriors. There were no words of recrimination now, no lingering doubts. In the crucible of battle, forged by his willing sacrifice, the bonds of the clan had been renewed and strengthened. Halvor approached, offering Kjell a hand to steady himself. "I was wrong to doubt you," the young warrior said, his voice thick with emotion. "We all were." Kjell clasped Halvor's arm, looking around at the faces of his clan. "No," he said softly. "Your doubt was earned by my actions, but today we have all proven what it truly means to be part of this clan. Today we remember that our strength lies not in blind obedience, but in our willingness to fight for each other, to sacrifice for each other." As the sun began to set on the battlefield, Kjell knew that while many challenges still lay ahead, the clan had emerged from this trial stronger than ever. The fire of battle had burned away their divisions, leaving behind a unity tempered by adversity and mutual sacrifice. The victory over the Shadowmere clan had brought a newfound unity to Kjell's people, but the leader knew that the root of their troubles still remained unaddressed. As the clan recovered from the battle, Kjell made a decision that would change everything. It was time to confront the mastermind behind the betrayal that had nearly torn them apart. Under the cover of night, Kjell slipped away from the camp, leaving only a cryptic note for Bjorn. He had received intelligence about the whereabouts of the true puppet master, and he was determined to face this threat alone. As dawn broke, Kjell found himself standing before a hidden cave entrance deep in the misty forests that bordered their territory. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the darkness, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The cave opened into a large chamber, dimly lit by flickering torches. And there, seated on a crude throne of stone, was a figure Kjell had not seen in decades. "Hello, son," the figure said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Kjell's breath caught in his throat. "Father? But you're dead. We buried you years ago." The old man chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. A necessary deception, I'm afraid." As Kjell's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he could see the ravages of time on his father's face. Thorvald, once the mighty leader of their clan, now looked ancient and withered, but his eyes still burned with the same intensity Kjell remembered from his youth. "Why?" Kjell demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. "Why the betrayal? Why turn Einar against us?" Thorvald leaned forward, his gnarled hands gripping the arms of his stone seat. "Betrayal? No, my son. Everything I've done has been for the good of our people. You just couldn't see the bigger picture." What followed was a revelation that shook Kjell to his core. Thorvald spoke of ancient prophecies, of a coming darkness that threatened not just their clan, but all the clans of the region. He had faked his death and worked from the shadows, manipulating events to prepare for this looming threat. "The division in our clan, the alliances you forged through adversity," Thorvald explained, "all of it was necessary. Only a united front of all clans can hope to stand against what's coming." Kjell listened, his mind reeling. But the lives lost, the trust broken, there had to be another way. Thorvald's eyes flashed. "Sacrifices must be made for the greater good. I had hoped you would understand that by now." As Thorvald continued to speak, revealing long-buried secrets about their clan's history and its role in an age-old conflict, Kjell found himself facing a moral dilemma that challenged everything he stood for. "You speak of unity," Kjell said, his voice tight with emotion, "but your actions have caused nothing but pain and mistrust. How can you justify that?" Thorvald rose from his seat, his frail body belying the power in his voice. "Justify? Look at what you've accomplished, Kel. Your clan is stronger now than ever before. The alliances you forged, tempered in the fires of adversity, are unbreakable. That was my gift to you, to our people. Kel's hand tightened on his sword. A gift? You call betrayal and death a gift? I call survival a gift, Thorvald shot back. The threat we face cares nothing for individual lives or clan loyalties. It will sweep across our lands like a plague unless we are prepared to meet it united. For a moment, silence fell between them. Kel's mind raced, trying to reconcile the father he had idolized in his youth with the manipulative mastermind standing before him. What now? Kel finally asked. Why reveal yourself to me after all this time? Thorvald's expression softened slightly. Because the time has come for the final phase of our preparation. And for that I need you, son. Not as a pawn, but as a partner. He went on to explain his vision for a grand alliance of all clans with Kel at its head. The betrayals, the conflicts, even the battle with the Shadowmere, all had been steps toward this ultimate goal. As Thorvald spoke, Kel felt the weight of his choices pressing down upon him. He could see the logic in his father's plan, the necessity of preparation for the coming threat. But the cost had been so high. And if I refuse? Kel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Thorvald's eyes hardened. Then all of this will have been for nothing. The clans will fall divided, and our people will be wiped from the face of the earth. In that moment, Kel realized the true nature of the choice before him. It wasn't just about confronting the mastermind behind the betrayal. It was about choosing between vengeance for past wrongs and a chance for lasting peace. A peace that might be the only hope for their survival. You ask me to forgive betrayal, to forget the lives lost, Kel said, his voice thick with emotion. Thorvald shook his head. I ask you to look beyond personal grievances to the future of our people. The dead are beyond our help now, but the living still need you, Kel. As Kel wrestled with his decision, memories flashed through his mind. The faces of those lost in the conflicts his father had engineered. The newfound unity of his clan after the battle with the Shadowmere, the prophecies of a coming darkness that threatened everything. If I agree, Kel said slowly, it will be on my terms. No more manipulation, no more secrets. We face this threat together, in the open. Thorvald nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. As you wish. You've grown into a stronger leader than I ever was, son. Kel's jaw tightened. That remains to be seen. I'm not sure I'll ever forgive you for what you've done. But for the sake of our people, I'm willing to work with you. As they began to discuss the details of uniting the clans, Kel felt a mix of emotions churning within him. Relief at finally understanding the true motivations behind the betrayal, warred with anger at the cost of his father's grand plan. Hours passed as father and son talked, strategized, and at times argued. When they finally emerged from the cave, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. Kjell turned to his father, his expression resolute. We'll return to the clan together. You'll face them and explain everything. Their judgment will determine your fate. Thorvald nodded, accepting his son's terms. As they made their way back to the camp, Kjell's mind was already racing with the challenges ahead. Uniting the clans would be no easy task, and the threat his father spoke of loomed on the horizon. But for the first time in what felt like ages, Kjell felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now they would face it with open eyes and honest hearts. As the lights of the camp came into view, Kjell steeled himself for the reaction of his people. He had chosen a path of potential peace over vengeance, but the true test of his decision was yet to come. The camp was abuzz with whispers and tense glances as Kjell and Thorvald approached. Word of their arrival had spread quickly, and the clan gathered in the central meeting area, a mixture of confusion, anger, and curiosity evident on their faces. Kjell stepped forward, his father a silent presence behind him. The weight of what he was about to do pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew it was necessary. He raised his hand and a hush fell over the assembled crowd. My brothers and sisters, Kjell began, his voice carrying across the gathering. I stand before you today with a heavy heart and a burden of truth that I must share. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. I have made mistakes. Grave mistakes that have cost us dearly in blood and trust. In my quest to protect our clan, I lost sight of the very values that make us who we are. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bjorn stepped forward, concern etched on his weathered face. Kjell, what are you saying? Kjell met his old friend's gaze. I'm saying that I was wrong, Bjorn. The tests of loyalty, the suspicion, the mistrust I sowed among us, it was all misguided. He turned back to address the entire clan. But my failings are only part of the story. The man standing behind me is Thorvald, my father, whom we all believed dead. He is the architect of much of the strife we have endured. Gasps and cries of disbelief echoed through the gathering. Thorvald stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his aged appearance. It's true, Thorvald said, his voice strong despite the years. I orchestrated events from the shadows, believing it necessary for the survival of not just our clan, but all the clans in our realm. What followed was a full account of everything, the prophecies, the looming threat, and the manipulations that had shaped their recent history. Kjell held nothing back, baring his soul to his people, admitting his faults and the moments when he had faltered. As the tale unfolded, Kjell could see the myriad of emotions playing across the faces of his clan members. Shock, anger, disbelief, and for some, a dawning understanding. When the account was finished, a heavy silence fell over the camp. It was Astrid who broke it, her voice tight with emotion. What now, Kjell? How can we move forward from this? Kjell nodded, acknowledging the weight of her question. Now we change. Not just in our actions, but in the very structure of our clan. For too long, power has been concentrated in the hands of a single leader. It's time for that to end. He outlined his proposal, a council of elders elected by the clan, to govern alongside the clan leader. Decisions would be made collectively, with transparency and input from all. No more secrets, Kjell declared. No more unilateral decisions that affect us all. We will lead together or not at all. The clan erupted into discussion, arguments breaking out as people debated the merits of Kjell's proposal. Some embraced the idea of shared power, while others clung to tradition, arguing that a strong single leader was necessary in dangerous times. Halvor, the young warrior who had challenged Kjell before, spoke up. And what of you, Kjell? What role do you see for yourself in this new structure? Kjell met the young man's gaze steadily. That is not for me to decide. I stand before you now, asking for your judgment. If you believe I am still worthy to lead, I will do so under this new council. If not, I will step aside and serve the clan in whatever capacity you deem fit. A hush fell over the gathering as the weight of Kjell's words sank in. He was putting his leadership, his very position within the clan, to a vote. Bjorn stepped forward, his voice gruff with emotion. I say we vote now. Let every voice be heard. The voting process was tense, with clan members casting stones into urns. White for Kjell to remain as leader, black for him to step down. As the last vote was cast, Kjell stood tall, ready to accept whatever decision his people made. The count was agonizingly slow. When it was finally complete, Bjorn turned to address the clan, his face unreadable. By a margin narrower than a blade's edge, Bjorn announced, Kjell remains our leader. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the gathering. Kjell bowed his head, humbled by the trust his people had placed in him, aware of how close he had come to losing it all. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I swear to you, I will earn this trust anew each and every day. As the tension of the vote dissipated, an unexpected mood began to take hold of the camp. It was Astrid who first suggested it, a ceremony of renewal, a way to mark this new chapter in their clan's history. As the sun began to set, the clan gathered around the central fire. One by one, each member came forward to cast something into the flames. a symbol of past grievances, of old ways to be left behind. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Liv awoke to the gentle coos of her newborn son. She smiled, drinking in the sight of his tiny face, his wispy blonde hair, and his bright blue eyes that mirrored her own. As she cradled him close, breathing in his sweet scent, she felt a contentment she had never known before. "Good morning, my little warrior," Liv whispered, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. "Are you hungry?" She settled back against the furs of her bed, allowing her son to nurse as the sounds of the village coming to life filtered through the wooden walls of her home. The rhythmic pounding of the blacksmith's hammer, the bleating of sheep, and the chatter of women gathering at the well all blended into a familiar symphony. Liv's husband, Bjorn, had left before dawn to join a fishing expedition. She looked forward to his return, imagining how his eyes would light up when he saw their son again. They had waited so long for this child, and now that he was here, their joy knew no bounds. As her baby finished nursing, Liv burped him gently, and then wrapped him snugly in a soft wool blanket. "Let's go see what the day brings, shall we?" she cooed, securing him against her chest with a long strip of cloth. Liv stepped out of her home, breathing in the crisp morning air. The village was alive with activity, men and women going about their daily tasks with purpose. She nodded greetings to her neighbors as she made her way to the center of the settlement, where she knew her friend Astrid would be waiting. "Liv," Astrid called out, waving enthusiastically. "How is the little one today?" Liv smiled, patting her son's back gently. "He's well, growing stronger every day." As the two women chatted, comparing notes on their children and discussing the latest village gossip, a faint sound caught Liv's attention. She cocked her head, straining to hear. "Do you hear that?" Liv asked, her brow furrowing. Astrid paused, listening. "Hear what?" The sound came again, clearer this time. A long, low blast that sent a chill down Liv's spine. "War horns." "No," Liv breathed, her arms instinctively tightening around her baby. "It can't be." The village erupted into chaos as the horn blasts grew louder, closer. Men rushed to grab weapons, women hurried children indoors, and the air filled with shouts of alarm and fear. "Raid!" someone yelled. "We're under attack!" Liv's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around wildly. "Astrid, we need to hide. Now!" But before they could move, the first wave of attackers burst into the village. Warriors from a rival clan, their faces painted with blood and their eyes wild with battle lust, poured through the gates like a flood of death and destruction. Liv turned to run, but the press of panicked villagers blocked her path. She clutched her baby tightly, trying to shield him from the mayhem erupting around them. The clash of steel on steel rang out, punctuated by screams of pain and fury. "This way!" Astrid shouted, grabbing Liv's arm and pulling her towards a narrow alley between two buildings. They had barely made it a few steps when a burly warrior with a matted red beard stepped into their path, his axe dripping with fresh blood. "Well, well," he growled, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "What do we have here?" Liv pushed Astrid behind her, facing the warrior with a fierce glare. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The warrior laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Or what, little mother, you'll scold me?" He lunged forward, reaching for Liv's baby. With a strength born of desperation, Liv lashed out, her fist connecting solidly with the warrior's nose. There was a satisfying crunch, and he stumbled back, howling in pain and rage. "Run!" Liv shouted to Astrid, already moving past the stunned attacker. They sprinted through the village, dodging fights and leaping over fallen debris. Liv's lungs burned, and her arms ached from holding her child so tightly, but she refused to slow down. She had to get her baby to safety. As they rounded a corner, Liv skidded to a halt. A group of village men had formed a defensive line, holding back a surge of enemy warriors. Among them, she spotted a familiar face. "Bjorn," she cried out, relief washing over her. Her husband turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes widening in fear when he saw her. "Liv, get out of here. Take the baby and run." but it was too late. A massive warrior, easily a head taller than the men around him, broke through the line. His gaze locked onto Liv and the bundle in her arms, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Time seemed to slow as the warrior advanced. Liv saw Bjorn fighting desperately to reach her, saw Astrid screaming something she couldn't hear over the roar of blood in her ears. She turned to run, but her foot caught on a fallen timber, and she stumbled. The warrior was on her in an instant. His huge hands grabbed at her child, trying to tear him from her grasp. "No!" Liv screamed, clinging to her baby with all her might. "You can't have him. I won't let you." She kicked and bit and clawed, fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. But the warrior was too strong, too determined. With a final brutal wrench, he ripped the baby from Liv's arms. The sound that tore from Liv's throat was inhuman, a wail of such anguish and fury that it cut through the din of battle like a knife. She lunged for the warrior, but a blow to the head sent her crashing to the ground. As darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, Liv saw the warrior retreating, her precious child still clutched in his arms. She tried to call out, to move, to do anything, but her body wouldn't respond. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was the fading cries of her baby, carried away by the retreating raiders. When Liv finally came to, the world around her was eerily quiet. The acrid smell of smoke filled her nostrils, and as she pushed herself up, wincing at the pain that lanced through her head, she saw the devastation that had been wrought upon her village. Buildings smoldered, their blackened timbers reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Bodies lay strewn about, some moving weakly, others terrifyingly still. The air was thick with the moans of the wounded and the weeping of the bereaved. But Liv heard none of it. All she could hear was the echo of her baby's cries. All she could feel was the phantom weight of him in her arms. She staggered to her feet, her eyes wild and searching. "My baby," she rasped, her voice hoarse from screaming. "Where is my baby?" As the full horror of what had happened crashed over her, Liv fell to her knees, a scream of pure anguish tearing from her throat. Her child, her precious son, was gone, taken by the monsters who had destroyed her world. In that moment, as the sun set on the ruins of her village and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, something changed within Liv. The gentle mother was burned away, leaving behind a core of unbreakable steel and unquenchable fury. She raised her eyes to the horizon in the direction the raiders had fled and made a solemn vow. "I will find you," she whispered, her words carrying the weight of an unbreakable oath. "I will cross mountains and seas, fight armies and gods if I must. But I will find you, my son, and heaven help anyone who stands in my way." The acrid smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood filled Liv's nostrils as she slowly regained consciousness. Her head throbbed, and every muscle in her body ached as she pushed herself up from the ash-covered ground. Blinking against the harsh light of day, she surveyed the devastation around her. Where once stood a thriving village, now lay only ruin. Smoldering timbers reached skyward like blackened fingers, and the air was thick with the sounds of mourning. Liv's eyes darted frantically from one destroyed building to another, her mind struggling to process the carnage. "My baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse. The memory of her child being torn from her arms came rushing back, bringing with it a wave of anguish that threatened to overwhelm her. But Liv pushed it down, forcing herself to focus. She had to find her husband, Bjorn. Together, they would rescue their son. Liv staggered to her feet, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. She made her way through the wreckage of the village, calling out Bjorn's name. The few survivors she encountered were too shell-shocked to offer any help, their vacant eyes staring unseeing as they wandered aimlessly. As she approached the remains of their home, Liv's heart began to race. "Bjorn," she called out, her voice growing more desperate. "Bjorn, where are you?" Then she saw him. Bjorn lay motionless near the charred remnants of their front door, his once strong body broken and still. Liv fell to her knees beside him, her trembling hands reaching out to touch his face. "No," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "No, no, no. Bjorn, please. Wake up. You have to wake up." But Bjorn didn't stir. His eyes, once so full of life and love, stared blankly at the sky. Liv gathered him into her arms, cradling his head against her chest as she had done with their son just yesterday morning. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, rocking back and forth. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't protect our boy. I couldn't save you. I failed you both." For what felt like hours, Liv remained there, holding her husband's body and weeping. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ruined village, something shifted within her. The crushing grief began to harden, transforming into a burning rage that spread through her veins like fire. Liv gently laid Bjorn's body down, closing his eyes with trembling fingers. She stood, her fists clenched at her sides, and raised her face to the darkening sky. "Hear me, gods," she growled, her voice low and dangerous. "I, Liv Bjorn's daughter, swear a blood oath this day. I will find my son. I will rescue him from those who took him, and I will make them pay for what they've done. I swear this by the bones of my ancestors, by the blood of my husband, and by every breath left in my body. And if you stand in my way, I'll fight you too." With a swift motion, Liv drew her knife and sliced her palm. She let the blood drip onto the ground, sealing her oath. "This I swear," she whispered. As if in response to her vow, a cold wind whipped through the village, causing the embers of dying fires to flare briefly. Liv felt a chill run down her spine, but she squared her shoulders, embracing the path that lay before her. Without wasting another moment, Liv began to gather what she would need for her journey. She moved with purpose, her grief temporarily pushed aside by the burning need for action. First, she retrieved her bow and quiver from the ruins of her home, checking each arrow carefully before securing them to her back. Next, she made her way to the village's communal storage, praying to find some supplies that had escaped the raiders' notice. To her relief, a few sacks of dried meat and fruit remained hidden beneath a fallen beam. Liv quickly packed these into a sturdy leather bag, along with a water skin and flint for starting fires. As she worked, a voice called out to her. "Liv? Is that you?" She turned to see Astrid, her friend from the market, limping towards her. Astrid's face was streaked with soot and tears, and she cradled her arm against her chest. "Astrid," Liv acknowledged, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "You survived." Astrid nodded, her eyes wide with concern. "Liv, what are you doing? We need to gather the survivors to rebuild." "No!" Liv cut her off sharply. "I'm going after them. I'm going to find my son." Astrid gasped, reaching out to grasp Liv's arm. "But that's madness. You can't go alone. The raiders are too many, too strong. You'll be killed." Liv jerked her arm away, fixing Astrid with a steely gaze. "Then I'll die trying, but I will not abandon my child." "Please, Liv," Astrid begged, tears welling in her eyes. "We need you here. The village needs you. Think of what Bjorn would want." "Do not," Liv snarled, her voice low and dangerous. "Presume to tell me what my husband would want. Bjorn is dead, Astrid. Dead defending our home, our people, our son. And I will honor his sacrifice by bringing our child back, no matter the cost." Astrid recoiled as if struck, her face pale with shock at Liv's vehemence. I'm sorry. I didn't mean..." But Liv had already turned away, continuing her preparations. She strapped a short sword to her hip and tucked several knives into her boots and belt. Finally, she donned a sturdy leather jerkin, offering some protection against both weather and weapons. As she worked, Liv's mind raced, plotting her next moves. The raiders had come from the east, over the mountains. That's where she would start. She knew the journey would be perilous, filled with dangers both natural and human. But none of that mattered. Only her son mattered now. With her preparations complete, Liv stood at the edge of the village, gazing out at the path that lay before her. The sun had set, leaving the world bathed in the eerie half-light of dusk. In the distance, the mountains loomed, their peaks shrouded in mist. Astrid approached her one last time, her voice soft and pleading. "Liv, please, don't do this. Stay with us. Help us rebuild. We can send word to other villages. Gather warriors to go after the raiders together." Liv turned to her friend, her eyes softening for just a moment. She saw the fear and concern in Astrid's face, and felt a fleeting pang of guilt for leaving her people in their time of need. But the memory of her son's cries as he was torn from her arms steeled her resolve. "I'm sorry, Astrid," Liv said, her voice gentle but firm. "I can't wait. Every moment I delay is another moment my son is in danger. I have to go now, alone. I'll move faster that way and I'll be harder to track." Astrid nodded, resignation settling over her features. "I understand. Just promise me you'll be careful, and if you can, come back to us." Liv managed a small, grim smile. "I'll come back," she promised. "With my son." With those final words, Liv turned and set off down the path, her strides long and purposeful. She didn't look back at the ruins of her village or the life she was leaving behind. Her eyes were fixed firmly ahead, on the mountains that separated her from her child. As she walked, Liv's mind filled with images of the raiders who had attacked her village. She remembered their cruel faces, their brutal strength. But instead of fear, she felt only a cold, hard determination. They had taken everything from her: her home, her husband, her child. Now she would take everything from them. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky as Liv disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Behind her, the smoking ruins of her village faded into the distance. Ahead lay a journey fraught with danger and uncertainty. But Liv walked on, each step bringing her closer to her son and to the vengeance she had sworn. In the quiet of the forest, with only the sound of her own footsteps for company, Liv made one final silent vow. "I'm coming for you, my son," she whispered into the night. The dense forest loomed before Liv, its ancient trees standing like silent sentinels as she pushed deeper into the wilderness. 3 days had passed since she'd left the smoldering ruins of her village behind, and the weight of her quest hung heavy on her shoulders. Her body ached from the relentless pace she'd set, but the fire in her heart burned hotter than any physical discomfort. As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Liv's keen ears picked up a sound that made her blood run cold. The low, menacing growl of wolves echoed through the trees, growing closer with each passing moment. "Not now," Liv muttered, her hand instinctively moving to the hilt of her sword. "I don't have time for this." She scanned her surroundings, looking for a defensible position. A large oak tree with low-hanging branches caught her eye, and she quickly made her way towards it. Just as she reached for the lowest branch, a massive gray wolf burst from the underbrush, its yellow eyes fixed on her with predatory intent. Liv's sword cleared its sheath with a metallic ring, but she knew that in open combat against a pack she stood little chance. Her mind raced, searching for a solution as more wolves emerged from the shadows, circling her with practiced efficiency. Then, an idea struck her. Liv reached into her pack, withdrawing a handful of dried meat. The lead wolf's nostrils flared, its attention momentarily diverted from its prey to the tempting morsel. "You want this, don't you?" Liv said, her voice low and steady. She tossed a piece of meat far to her left, watching as 2 of the wolves broke formation to fight over it. Seizing the moment of confusion, Liv launched herself at the oak tree, scrambling up its trunk with desperate speed. She'd barely pulled her legs up when snapping jaws closed on the empty air where her ankle had been a moment before. Safe in the branches, Liv allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. The wolves circled below, snarling in frustration at their lost meal. Liv knew she couldn't stay in the tree forever, but for now it offered a much-needed respite. As the night wore on, Liv dozed fitfully, always keeping one eye on the wolves below. By dawn, the pack had moved on, leaving her free to continue her journey. She descended from the tree, muscles stiff from the uncomfortable night but grateful for her quick thinking. "Thank you, old friend," Liv murmured, patting the oak's rough bark before setting off once more. The day passed in a blur of green leaves and dappled sunlight as Liv pressed on, always eastward, always following the faint trail left by the raiders. As the sun began to set once more, She found herself at the foot of a steep, rocky hillside. Exhausted and in need of shelter for the night, Liv began to climb, hoping to find a defensible position among the rocks. As she pulled herself over a particularly large boulder, her hand brushed against something that didn't feel like natural stone. Puzzled, she looked closer, brushing away years of moss and lichen to reveal an intricately carved rune. What in Odin's name? Liv breathed, tracing the ancient symbol with her fingertips. Her curiosity piqued. Liv began to search the area more carefully. It didn't take long for her to discover a narrow opening, nearly hidden by overgrown vegetation. With some effort, she cleared away the plants and squeezed through the gap, finding herself in a small, dark cave. Liv fumbled for her flint, quickly striking a spark to light a small torch she fashioned from a branch and some oil-soaked rags. As the flame flickered to life, she gasped at the sight before her. The walls of the cave were covered in runes, hundreds of them, carved with painstaking precision into the living rock. Liv moved closer, her torch casting dancing shadows across the ancient writings. Though many of the symbols were unfamiliar to her, she recognized enough to begin piecing together their meaning. A prophecy, she whispered, her eyes widening as she deciphered more of the text. A mother's fury, changing the course of history? Liv's heart raced as she read on, the runes seeming to speak directly to her quest, to the burning rage that fueled her every step. When the child of peace is taken by shadows, a mother's wrath shall shake the 9 worlds. Her journey through fire and ice shall reforge the bonds of fate, and her vengeance shall echo through eternity. Liv stumbled back, her mind reeling from the implications. Could this ancient prophecy be about her? About her son? She shook her head, trying to clear the fog of confusion and fatigue that clouded her thoughts. It doesn't matter, she said aloud, her voice firm. Prophecy or not, I'm getting my son back. As she turned to leave the cave, a final line of runes caught her eye. She leaned in close, squinting in the flickering torchlight to make out the words. Beware the guardian of the mystic wood, for its strength is matched only by its fury. A chill ran down Liv's spine at these words, but she squared her shoulders and set her jaw. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. She had to, for her son. Emerging from the cave, Liv found that night had fallen once more. She made camp at the mouth of the cave, her mind churning with thoughts of the prophecy and what it might mean for her journey. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of runes that danced and shifted, always just beyond her understanding. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Liv set out early, her steps quickened by a new sense of purpose. The prophecy, whether truly about her or not, had rekindled the fire in her heart. She was more determined than ever to rescue her son and make the raiders pay for what they had done. As the day wore on, Liv found herself entering a part of the forest that seemed older, wilder than what she had passed through before. The trees here were massive, their gnarled trunks speaking of centuries of slow growth. An eerie stillness hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig beneath her feet. It was in this ancient wood that Liv encountered the guardian mentioned in the runes. She had paused to refill her water skin at a bubbling stream when a low, rumbling growl froze her in place. Slowly, she turned to find herself face to face with the largest bear she had ever seen. The beast reared up on its hind legs, towering over Liv, its roar shaking the very ground beneath her feet. In that moment, Liv knew that this was no ordinary animal. This was a creature of legend, a guardian spirit of the forest itself. I mean you no harm, Liv said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. I seek only to pass through your domain. The bear dropped back to all fours, its dark eyes fixed on Liv with an intelligence that sent shivers down her spine. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with a speed that belied its massive size, the bear charged. Liv dove to the side, rolling to her feet with her sword already in hand. The bear's claws raked the air where she had been standing a heartbeat before. She knew that in a test of pure strength, she stood no chance against this mystical beast. Her only hope lay in her agility and wit. What followed was a deadly dance through the ancient forest. Liv ducked and weaved between the massive trees, using their trunks as shields against the bear's relentless attacks. Her sword flashed in the dappled sunlight, scoring glancing blows against the beast's thick hide, but never managing to land a decisive strike. As the battle wore on, Liv felt her strength beginning to flag. The bear seemed tireless, its attacks coming with undiminished fury. In a desperate gambit, Liv backed herself up against a cliff face, waiting until the last possible moment before diving between the bear's legs as it charged. The beast, unable to stop its momentum, crashed headfirst into the rock wall. Stunned, it staggered backward, giving Liv the opening she needed. With a cry that held all her grief, rage, and determination, she plunged her sword deep into the bear's chest. The guardian let out a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. It stumbled, fell, and was still. Liv stood over her fallen foe, her chest heaving with exertion. Blood flowed from a dozen wounds where the bear's claws had found their mark, but she was alive. She had faced the guardian and emerged victorious. As the adrenaline of battle began to fade, the full extent of her injuries made themselves known. Liv stumbled, her vision blurring as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. She managed a few more steps before her legs gave out entirely. As consciousness slipped away, Liv found herself at the edge of a clearing. Through her fading vision, she caught a glimpse of trees unlike any she had ever seen before. Their bark seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and their leaves whispered with voices just beyond her understanding. "The mystic wood," Liv murmured, her words slurred as darkness closed in around her. Her last thought before succumbing to unconsciousness was of her son, and the journey that still lay ahead. And so, battered and bloodied but unbroken, Liv collapsed at the threshold of a realm beyond mortal ken, her quest to save her son far from over. Consciousness returned to Liv slowly, like mist clearing from a morning valley. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the soft, ethereal light that seemed to emanate from the very air around her. Gone was the pain of her wounds, replaced by a warmth that coursed through her body. As her vision focused, she found herself lying on a bed of moss so soft it felt like down, surrounded by trees unlike any she had ever seen before. Their trunks shimmered with an inner light, bark rippling like water in a gentle breeze. Leaves of silver and gold whispered secrets in a language just beyond her understanding. Liv sat up, marveling at the absence of pain where grievous wounds should have been. "Ah, you're awake at last," came a voice, ancient and melodious as a mountain stream. Liv turned to see an old woman emerge from between two luminous trees. Her hair was as white as fresh snow, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of centuries of laughter and sorrow. But it was her eyes that captured Liv's attention, eyes of such a deep, piercing blue that they seemed to contain entire worlds within them. "Who are you?" Liv asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Where am I?" The old woman smiled, the expression transforming her face into one of timeless beauty. "Names have power here, child. As for where you are, you stand at the heart of the enchanted forest, a place between worlds." Liv's mind reeled, struggling to comprehend. "The bear. I was fighting a bear. I was wounded." "Indeed you were." The woman nodded, her eyes twinkling with something akin to pride. "Few have faced the guardian and lived to tell the tale. Your courage is impressive, as is the fire that burns within you." Memories flooded back. The raid, her son taken, the oath sworn in blood. Liv surged to her feet, her hand instinctively reaching for a sword that wasn't there. "My son," she said urgently. "I have to find him. I've already lost too much time." The old woman held up a hand, her expression softening. "Peace, child. Time flows differently here. What feels like days to you has been but moments in the world beyond. Your quest is not lost." Liv's shoulders sagged with relief, but the fire in her eyes didn't dim. "Then I must go. Every moment my son is with those monsters is a moment too long." "And go you shall," the woman agreed, But not before you are prepared. The path ahead is treacherous, and you will need every advantage you can muster. Over the next few days, or perhaps it was weeks, for time truly did seem fluid in this strange realm, the old woman began to train Liv. She taught her combat techniques long forgotten by the world of men, moves that flowed like water and struck like lightning. "Your rage gives you strength," the woman said as they sparred with branches that moved like living things in their hands. "But it also blinds you. Learn to channel it, to make it a tool rather than a master." Liv nodded, adjusting her stance. She lunged, her makeshift weapon a blur as it sought an opening in the old woman's defense. But where she expected to meet resistance, she found only air as her opponent seemed to flow around the strike like mist. "Better," the woman smiled, tapping Liv lightly on the back of the head with her own branch. "But still too rigid. You fight as if your body and weapon are separate things. They must be one, an extension of your will." As the training progressed, Liv found herself growing stronger, faster, more in tune with her surroundings. And it wasn't just her physical abilities that were changing. One morning, as she sat by a crystal-clear stream to rest, she noticed a fox watching her curiously from the underbrush. "Hello there," Liv said absently, not expecting a response. To her shock, a voice echoed in her mind, playful and sly. "Hello yourself, Two Legs. You smell of other world and old magic." Liv scrambled backward, her eyes wide. You can speak?" The fox tilted its head, amusement dancing in its amber eyes. "All creatures speak, Two Legs. Few of your kind remember how to listen." From that moment on, a new world opened up to Liv. She found she could communicate with all manner of forest creatures, from the tiniest field mouse to the great owl that watched over the forest by night. They shared with her their wisdom, their understanding of the land and its secrets. It was the owl, in fact, that provided her with crucial information for her journey. "The clan you seek," it hooted one night as Liv sat beneath its tree. "They dwell beyond the Mist Mountains. A treacherous journey on foot." Liv's heart sank. The Mist Mountains were notorious for their dangerous passes and unpredictable weather. It would take weeks, if not months, to navigate them safely. But the owl wasn't finished. "There is another way," it continued, its golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. "A hidden path through the heart of the mountain itself. Few know of it, fewer still dare to use it. But for one touched by the old magic as you are, it might offer safe passage." Liv leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Tell me more about this path. How do I find it?" As the owl explained, Liv felt a surge of hope. This hidden route could cut her journey time in half, bringing her that much closer to her son. When she shared this news with the old woman the next day, her mentor nodded sagely. "The path of which the owl speaks is indeed real, and indeed perilous, but I believe you are ready to face its challenges." Liv stood straighter, feeling the truth of those words in her bones. She was no longer the same woman who had stumbled into this enchanted realm, broken and bleeding. She was stronger now, faster, more attuned to the world around her. "When do I leave?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. The old woman smiled, a hint of sadness in her ageless eyes. "Dawn tomorrow. Tonight we prepare." That evening was filled with final lessons, with the old woman imparting last bits of wisdom and Liv soaking up every word. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Liv stood at the edge of the clearing ready to depart. The old woman approached, carrying a bundle wrapped in shimmering leaves. "A few gifts for your journey," she said, handing it to Liv. Inside, Liv found a cloak that seemed to shift colors like the forest itself, a small pouch of herbs with healing properties beyond any she had encountered before, and a dagger with a blade that glowed with an inner light. "The cloak will help you move unseen when needed," the old woman explained. "The herbs will aid in healing both body and spirit. And the dagger, well, let's just say it has a particular aversion to those who would do harm to the innocent." Liv looked up, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The old woman placed a gnarled hand on Liv's cheek, her touch as gentle as a summer breeze. "Live, child. Live and save your son. That will be thanks enough." With a final nod of determination, Liv turned and strode into the forest. As she walked, she felt the changes in her body and spirit. Her steps were surer, her senses sharper. The forest seemed to whisper encouragement as she passed, and she could swear she saw flashes of fur and feathers as the creatures of the wood came to bid her farewell. At the edge of the enchanted realm, Liv paused for a moment, looking back at the shimmering trees that had been her home and training ground. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward into the mundane world beyond. The lush, magical forest gave way to more familiar woods, but Liv could still feel the echo of the enchantment thrumming through her veins. She was changed, transformed by her time in that mystical place. Faster, stronger, more in tune with the world around her than ever before. As she set off towards the Mist Mountains and the hidden path that would lead her to her son, Liv's heart swelled with renewed purpose. The raiders who had taken her child had no idea what was coming for them. She was no longer just a grieving mother seeking vengeance. She was a force of nature, shaped by ancient magic and unbreakable determination. "I'm coming, my son," Liv whispered to the wind, "and gods help anyone who stands in my way." With that, she broke into a run, her feet barely seeming to touch the ground as she raced towards her destiny. The enchanted forest faded behind her, but its gifts remained, empowering her for the challenges that lay ahead. The salty breeze whipped through Liv's hair as she stood at the edge of a small fishing village, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. The journey through the Mist Mountains had been perilous, but her newfound abilities and the hidden path had seen her through. Now, the next leg of her quest lay before her, a treacherous crossing of the northern sea. Liv's gaze swept over the few small boats bobbing in the harbor. Most were simple fishing vessels, designed for short trips near the coast rather than the dangerous journey she had in mind. But one caught her eye, a sturdy longship, weather-beaten but still seaworthy. As she approached the vessel, an old fisherman called out to her, "You'd best stay away from that one, lass. She's not for sale or hire." Liv turned to the man, her eyes glinting with determination. "I need that boat," she said, her voice calm but brooking no argument. "My son's life depends on it." The fisherman's weathered face softened slightly at her words. "A noble cause, to be sure, but that don't change the fact that the boat ain't mine to give. Belongs to Thorstein, the village chief, and he ain't like to part with it." Liv nodded, a plan already forming in her mind. "Then take me to this Thorstein. I'll convince him myself." The meeting with Thorstein did not go as smoothly as Liv had hoped. The village chief, a burly man with a beard as wild as the sea he sailed, laughed outright at her request. "You? Sail the northern sea alone?" he bellowed, slapping his knee in mirth. "Lass, I've seen storms out there that would make the gods themselves tremble. What makes you think you can handle it?" Liv's patience, already worn thin by the urgency of her quest, snapped. In a move faster than the eye could follow, she had Thorstein pinned against the wall, her enchanted dagger at his throat. The blade hummed softly, as if eager to taste the blood of one who would impede its wielder's righteous quest. "I don't have time for your doubts," Liv growled, her voice low and dangerous. "Every moment we waste here is another moment my son suffers. I will have that boat by your leave or not." Thorstein's eyes widened, not just with fear, but with a dawning recognition. "By the gods," he whispered. "You're her, aren't you? The one they whisper about in the taverns. The mother who battles bears and walks through fire to reclaim her child." Liv released him, taking a step back. "I'm whoever I need to be to save my son. Now, will you give me the boat, or must I take it?" Thorstein rubbed his neck, a newfound respect in his eyes. "Take it," he said gruffly, "and may the gods have mercy on those who took your child, for it's clear you won't." With the longship secured, Liv wasted no time in setting sail. The old fisherman who had first spoken to her insisted on showing her the basics of handling the vessel before she left. "Ye may have the strength of 10 men and the favor of the gods," he said, as he demonstrated how to adjust the sail. "But the sea respects none of that. Learn her moods, work with her rather than against her, and ye might just survive." Liv nodded, absorbing every detail. As she prepared to cast off, the old man pressed a small, intricately carved piece of wood into her hand. "A token for luck," he said with a wink. "May it guide you safely to your boy." With that final blessing, Liv set sail, the coastline quickly receding behind her as she steered the longship into open waters. For the first day and night, the journey was smooth, almost peaceful. Liv found herself settling into a rhythm, working the sails and tiller with an ease that surprised her. But on the second day, the weather turned. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and the sea began to churn restlessly. Liv could feel the change in the air, a primal energy that set her nerves on edge. "A storm comes," she murmured to herself, gripping the tiller tightly. "Well then, let it come. I've faced worse than wind and waves." As if in answer to her challenge, the storm broke with a fury that seemed almost personal. Rain lashed the deck, while waves as tall as mountains threatened to swallow the longship whole. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook Liv to her very bones. But even as the tempest raged around her, Liv found a strange calm settling over her. The training she had received in the enchanted forest, the heightened awareness of her surroundings, all came into play. She moved about the ship with preternatural grace, adjusting sails and shifting course as if she could read the very intentions of the sea itself. Hours passed in a blur of wind and water. Liv's muscles screamed with fatigue, but she refused to yield. Her son's face floated before her mind's eye, giving her strength when her body wanted to fail. Finally, as dawn broke on the third day, the storm began to abate. Exhausted but triumphant, Liv guided the battered longship towards a small island that had appeared on the horizon. As she drew closer, she could make out the silhouettes of several figures on the beach, watching her approach. Wary but too tired to be overly cautious, Liv beached the longship and stepped onto the sand. The group that met her was a rough-looking bunch, men and women with hard eyes and well-worn weapons. Mercenaries, Liv realized, probably stranded on this island after their own ship was lost in the storm. Their leader, a scarred man with a patch over one eye, stepped forward. "Quite a show you put on out there," he said, his voice gravelly. Not many could have sailed through that hell and lived to tell the tale. Liv straightened, her hand resting casually on the hilt of her enchanted dagger. "I didn't come here for praise. I'm on a mission, and I won't let anything stand in my way." The one-eyed man raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A mission, eh? Sounds more interesting than sitting on this rock waiting for rescue. Care to share the details?" And so, Liv told them her story, of the raid on her village, her son stolen, and her oath of vengeance against those responsible. As she spoke, she could see the mercenaries' expressions changing, hardening with anger at the injustice, softening with sympathy for her plight. When she finished, the leader was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if coming to a decision. "We're with you," he said simply. Liv blinked in surprise. "Just like that?" The man shrugged. "We're sellswords, aye, but we've got our own code. Taking a babe from its mother's arms? That's beyond the pale. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "sounds like there might be some profit in it for us if we help you succeed." And so, Liv found herself with unexpected allies. The mercenaries helped her repair the longship, and soon they were back on the sea, their course set for the mainland where Liv's enemies awaited. As they approached the coast, the one-eyed leader, who had introduced himself as Bjorn, pointed out a small village nestled in a sheltered cove. "We should stop there," he suggested. "Resupply, gather information. Might be someone knows something about where they've taken your boy." Liv nodded, seeing the wisdom in his words, but as they drew closer, she felt a familiar fire igniting in her belly. "We'll do more than ask questions," she said, her voice hard. "These coastal villages, they often pay tribute to the clan that took my son. They're not innocent." Bjorn grinned, a wolfish expression that spoke of violence barely contained. "I was hoping you'd say that." The raid on the village was swift and merciless. Liv moved like a whirlwind of vengeance, her enchanted dagger flashing in the sunlight as she cut down any who dared to stand against her. The mercenaries followed in her wake, securing supplies and coin with practiced efficiency. In the village elder's house, Liv found what she was looking for, a map detailing the location of the clan's stronghold. Her heart sank as she studied it. The fortress was built into the side of a mountain, accessible only by a narrow, winding path that could be easily defended. "Impenetrable, they say," the village elder wheezed, cowering before Liv's burning gaze. "No army has ever taken it." Liv leaned in close, her voice a low growl. "I am not an army, old man. I am a mother seeking her child. And there is no fortress in this world or the next that will keep me from him." As they sailed away from the smoldering village, Liv stood at the prow of the longship, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains where her son was held. The path ahead would be difficult, perhaps even impossible. But she had come too far, endured too much to falter now. "Hold on, my little one," she whispered to the wind. "Mother's coming." The air grew thin and bitingly cold as Liv and her band of mercenaries began their treacherous ascent up the mountain. The fortress that held her son loomed above them, a dark silhouette against the pale sky, seemingly unreachable. But Liv's determination burned hotter than ever, warming her against the chill that sought to seep into her bones. "Watch your step," Bjorn, the one-eyed mercenary leader, called out as they navigated a particularly narrow ledge. "One wrong move here and it's a long way down." Liv nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. Every step brought her closer to her child, but also deeper into enemy territory. The mountain itself seemed to resist their progress, loose rocks skittering away under their feet, icy winds threatening to push them from the precipice. As they rounded a bend in the path, Liv's heightened senses suddenly prickled with danger. She held up a hand, signaling the group to halt. "What is it?" Bjorn whispered, his hand already on the hilt of his sword. Liv closed her eyes, focusing on the faint sounds carried on the wind. "Ambush," she breathed. "Above us. At least 8 men." No sooner had the words left her mouth than the first arrow whistled past her ear. The air erupted with war cries as rival clan scouts poured down from hidden positions in the rocks above. "Defensive formation," Bjorn roared, as the mercenaries scrambled to protect themselves from the onslaught. But Liv was already in motion. The training she had received in the enchanted forest kicked in, her body moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy the laws of nature. She leaped from rock to rock, her enchanted dagger flashing in the pale mountain light as she engaged the first of the attackers. The scout's eyes widened in shock as Liv seemed to flow around his wild sword swing. Before he could recover, her dagger found his throat and he crumpled to the ground. 2 more attackers rushed her, thinking to overwhelm her with numbers. But Liv moved like smoke, impossible to pin down. She ducked under one man's axe, using his momentum to send him tumbling over the cliff's edge. The other found himself disarmed and unconscious before he even realized what had happened. From his position below, Bjorn watched in awe as Liv single-handedly turned the tide of the battle. "By the gods," he muttered. "I almost feel sorry for the bastards who took her kid." Within minutes, the ambush had been thoroughly routed. The few surviving scouts fled back up the mountain, no doubt to warn the fortress of the approaching threat. Liv rejoined her companions, barely winded from the exertion. "We need to move quickly," she said, wiping her dagger clean. "They'll send reinforcements soon." But as they prepared to continue their ascent, a low rumble filled the air. Liv looked up to see a wall of white thundering down the mountainside towards them. "Avalanche!" she screamed. "Run!" The group scattered, desperately seeking shelter from the oncoming deluge of snow and rock. Liv sprinted towards an overhanging boulder, diving beneath it just as the avalanche roared past. The world became a chaos of noise and motion. the very mountain seeming to shake apart around her. When the tumult finally subsided, Liv cautiously emerged from her shelter. The path they had been following was gone, buried under tons of snow and debris, and of her companions, there was no sign. "Bjorn," she called out. "Anyone!" But only the wind answered, whistling mournfully through the newly reshaped landscape. Liv closed her eyes, fighting back a wave of despair. She was alone now, cut off from her allies, still far from her goal. For a moment, the weight of her quest threatened to crush her. How could she, one woman alone, hope to breach an impenetrable fortress and rescue her son? But then she remembered the prophecy from the enchanted forest, the old woman's teachings, and the fire that had driven her this far. "No," Liv growled, her fists clenching at her sides. "I've come too far to give up now." With renewed determination, she began to climb. The ascent was brutal, each step a battle against the mountain and her own exhaustion. The air grew thinner, making every breath a struggle. Ice formed on her eyelashes and in her hair, the cold biting deep into her bones. As night fell, Liv found herself in the grip of a vicious blizzard. The wind howled around her, drowning out all other sounds and reducing visibility to almost nothing. She stumbled on, guided only by her instincts and the faint pull she felt towards her captured child. In her mind's eye, Liv saw her son's face, heard his cries. The images spurred her on when her body screamed for rest. She climbed through the night, her hands bloodied from the sharp rocks, her limbs numb with cold. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to abate. Liv found herself on a narrow ledge, and as the clouds parted, she saw the fortress looming before her, so close now she could make out individual guards patrolling the walls. But between her and the gates lay a chasm, spanned only by a precarious rope bridge. Liv knew that attempting to cross it would mean certain death. The guards would spot her long before she reached the other side. She slumped against the rock face, her mind racing. She had come so far, endured so much. She couldn't fail now, not when she was so close. As she sat there struggling to form a plan, her gaze fell upon the bodies of the scouts they had defeated earlier, now half buried in snow at the bottom of a nearby ravine. A dangerous idea began to form in Liv's mind. It was risky, perhaps even suicidal, but it was the only chance she had. Hours later, as the sun began to set, a small group of clan warriors approached the fortress gates. They dragged with them a prisoner, a woman, battered and bound, her head bowed in defeat. "Open up," one of the warriors called out. "We've captured one of the intruders." The gates creaked open and the group was ushered inside. As they passed through, the prisoner raised her head slightly, and a fierce light gleamed in Liv's eyes. She was in. The warriors led her through the fortress, down winding corridors and steep staircases. Liv memorized every turn, every guard position, building a mental map for her eventual escape. Finally, they reached a heavy wooden door. "In you go," one of the warriors growled, shoving Liv roughly into a dark cell. "The clan leader will deal with you soon enough." As the door slammed shut behind her, Liv allowed herself a small, grim smile. They had no idea what they had just let into their midst. She flexed her wrists, easily slipping free of the loose bonds she had allowed them to place on her. In the darkness of the cell, Liv closed her eyes and reached out with her senses, searching for any trace of her son. Somewhere in this fortress, her child was waiting. And now nothing stood between them but stone and steel. "I'm here, my love," Liv whispered into the darkness. "Mother's here. And no force in this world or the next will keep us apart any longer." As she settled in to wait for her moment, Liv's mind was already racing, formulating plans and contingencies. The final battle was about to begin, and she would need every ounce of skill, cunning, and determination she had acquired on her long journey. For the first time since her son had been taken, Liv allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. She was inside the fortress. She was closer to her child than she had been in months, and she was ready to tear this mountain apart stone by stone if that's what it took to hold her baby in her arms once more. The guards outside her cell had no idea of the storm that was about to be unleashed within their impenetrable fortress. Liv flexed her fingers, feeling the power thrumming through her veins. The gifts of the enchanted forest, the strength born of a mother's love, and the unbreakable will that had carried her across sea and mountain. Soon, she promised herself and her distant son. The heavy iron door of Liv's cell creaked open, flooding the dark space with torchlight. Two burly guards stood in the doorway, their faces etched with disdain. "On your feet, prisoner," one of them growled. "The clan leader wants to see you." Liv rose slowly, careful to maintain her facade of a beaten captive. As the guards roughly grabbed her arms to lead her out, she allowed herself a small, hidden smile. This was exactly what she had been waiting for. They marched her through winding corridors, up narrow staircases and past heavily fortified checkpoints. Liv's keen eyes took in every detail, mapping the labyrinthine fortress in her mind. She noted the positions of guards, the locations of weapon racks, and potential weak points in the defenses. Every piece of information could be crucial for her escape with her son. As they approached what appeared to be the clan leader's chambers, Liv's enhanced hearing picked up snippets of a heated conversation from within. "The ritual must be performed at the next full moon," a gravelly voice insisted. "The child's blood will open the gateway." Liv's heart froze. They were talking about her baby, about some dark ceremony that required his blood. Her muscles tensed, ready to break free and burst into the room, but she forced herself to remain calm. She couldn't save her son if she got herself killed now. The guards pushed her into the chamber, where she found herself face to face with the clan leader, a tall, imposing man with a scar running down one side of his face. His cold eyes regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. "So," he said, his voice the same gravelly tone she had heard through the door. "You're the one who's been causing so much trouble. I must admit, I'm impressed you made it this far." Liv kept her head bowed, her voice meek as she replied, "I'm just a mother looking for her child. Please, I beg you, let me see my baby." The clan leader laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Your child? Oh no, you misunderstand. That baby is no longer yours. He belongs to us now, to our God. His destiny is far greater than you could ever imagine." Liv's mind raced, trying to process this new information. A dark god? A ritual sacrifice? The situation was even more dire than she had feared. What are you going to do to him?" she asked, allowing a tremor of fear to enter her voice. The clan leader's eyes gleamed with fanatical fervor. "We will use him to open a gateway to our God's realm. His innocent blood will break the seal that has kept our deity imprisoned for millennia. And when our God walks this earth once more, we will rule at his side." It took every ounce of Liv's self-control not to lunge at the madman before her. Instead, she forced tears to her eyes, playing the part of the broken mother. "Please," she begged, "I'll do anything. Take me instead. Just spare my child." The clan leader regarded her for a moment, then nodded to the guards. "Take her to the dungeons. We'll deal with her after the ritual." As the guards dragged her away, Liv's mind was already formulating a plan. She had to act fast. The full moon was only days away. Once back in the depths of the fortress, Liv made her move. With lightning speed, she broke free from the guard's grasp, disarming one and using him as a shield against the other. Within seconds, both lay unconscious at her feet. Moving swiftly and silently through the fortress, Liv began her sabotage. She poisoned food stores, sabotaged weapon caches, and subtly weakened key structural supports. All the while, she searched for any sign of her son, straining her enhanced senses to their limit. As she worked, Liv overheard more fragments of conversation among the clan members. She learned that the ritual was to take place in a hidden chamber deep within the mountain, accessible only through a secret passage. The location of this passage, however, remained frustratingly elusive. Hours passed, and Liv's anxiety grew with each moment. She had disrupted the fortress's defenses significantly, but she was no closer to finding her child. The full moon was rising and time was running out. Finally, as she crouched in the shadows of a storage room, she heard two guards talking in low voices. "It's time," one said. "The high priest has called for the child to be brought to the ritual chamber." "Through the passage behind the great hall's tapestry?" the other asked. "Yes, you fool," the first hissed. "Now be quiet. This must be done in absolute secrecy." Liv's heart raced. This was it. Her last chance to save her son. She slipped out of her hiding place and made her way to the great hall, moving like a shadow through the now familiar corridors. The hall was mercifully empty when she arrived. Liv quickly located the tapestry, a massive ornate piece depicting some ancient battle. Behind it, just as the guards had said, she found a concealed door. Taking a deep breath, Liv pushed it open and entered a narrow, torch-lit passageway that sloped steeply downward. She moved as fast as she dared, her ears straining for any sound of her child. The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning deep into the heart of the mountain. Just when Liv feared she might be too late, she heard it, the faint cry of a baby, echoing from somewhere ahead. "I'm coming," she whispered, quickening her pace. Finally, the passage opened into a vast, circular chamber. Crude stone steps led down to a central platform, where a group of robed figures stood around an altar. And there, lying on the cold stone, was her son. Liv's vision went red with fury. She was about to charge forward when the high priest raised a gleaming dagger above the child. "Great One," he intoned, his voice ringing through the chamber, "accept this innocent blood and break the chains that bind you." "No!" Liv screamed, abandoning all pretense of stealth. She leaped down the steps, her enchanted dagger flashing as she cut down 2 cultists before they could even turn. But she was still too far away. The high priest's dagger began to descend towards her helpless child. In that moment, Liv felt a surge of power unlike anything she had experienced before. It was as if all the magic of the enchanted forest, all the strength of her maternal love, all the determination of her long journey coalesced into a single, unstoppable force. She threw her dagger with inhuman accuracy. It streaked across the chamber like a bolt of lightning, striking the high priest's hand just as the tip of his blade touched the baby's chest. He screamed in pain and rage, the dagger clattering to the floor. Liv reached the altar in a blur of motion, scooping up her son and cradling him to her chest. For a brief, beautiful moment, the world fell away. She breathed in his scent, felt his tiny heartbeat against her own, and knew that everything she had endured had been worth it. But the moment was shattered by the enraged roar of the clan leader. "Seize her," he bellowed. "The ritual must not be interrupted." Cultists swarmed towards Liv from all sides. She fought like a cornered wolf, her free arm lashing out with lethal precision while she shielded her child with her body. But there were too many, and with her baby in her arms, she couldn't fight at her full capacity. Just as she feared all might be lost, a low rumble shook the chamber. Cracks appeared in the walls and ceiling, the result of her earlier sabotage. The clan leader's eyes widened in fear. "No! The fortress! What have you done?" Liv used the momentary distraction to break free from her attackers. She ran for the far side of the chamber where she had spotted another passageway, but as she reached it, a section of the ceiling collapsed, blocking her path. When the dust settled, Liv found herself face to face with the clan leader. He held a gleaming sword, his eyes wild with hate and desperation. "Give me the child," he snarled. "Our god must be freed." Liv backed away, her eyes darting around for any means of escape. That's when she saw it. A small opening in the wall, revealed by the collapsing stone. It was barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, leading to who knew where. She looked down at her son, then back at the approaching clan leader. In that moment, Liv made the hardest decision of her life. With a silent prayer, she placed her baby into the opening. "I'll find you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I promise." Then she turned to face the clan leader, her eyes burning with a mother's fury. "You want blood for your god?" she growled. "Come and take it." As Liv launched herself at her enemy, she caught a glimpse of a robed figure snatching her baby from the opening and disappearing into the darkness beyond. Her heart shattered, but she forced herself to focus on the fight at hand. She had come too far, endured too much to fail now. Somehow, some way, she would defeat these fanatics and reclaim her child. The prophecy from the enchanted forest echoed in her mind, a mother's fury changing the course of history. As the chamber crumbled around them and the clash of steel rang out, Liv silently renewed her vow. She would tear this mountain apart stone by stone if she had to, but she would hold her baby in her arms again. The final battle had begun, and the fate of not just her child, but perhaps the entire world, hung in the balance. The clash of steel against steel echoed through the crumbling chamber as Liv faced off against the clan leader. Her eyes, burning with a mother's fury, never left her opponent's face even as her peripheral vision tracked the cultist disappearing with her child into the darkness beyond. "You fool," the clan leader snarled, his blade whistling through the air. "You've doomed us all." Liv parried the blow, her enchanted dagger humming with power. "The only ones doomed here are you and your twisted cult," she growled back. Their battle was fierce but brief. Liv's newfound skills, honed in the enchanted forest and tempered by her long journey, proved too much for the clan leader. With a final, devastating strike, she sent him crashing to the ground, his sword clattering away into the darkness. Without sparing him another glance, Liv sprinted towards the opening where her child had disappeared. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, forcing her to squeeze through sideways. As she moved deeper into the mountain's heart, the sounds of the collapsing ritual chamber faded behind her. The tunnel opened into a vast network of underground caves. Phosphorescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie, pale blue light over the rough stone. In the distance, Liv could hear the echo of hurried footsteps and the faint cries of her baby. "I'm coming," she whispered, her voice carrying a promise that reverberated through the caverns. Liv set off at a run, her enhanced senses guiding her through the labyrinthine passages. The air grew colder and damper as she descended deeper into the earth. Strange sounds echoed from unseen chambers, skittering noises, low growls, and occasionally, something that sounded disturbingly like human whispers. As she rounded a corner, Liv came face to face with her first challenge. Blocking her path was a creature straight out of Viking legend, a draugr, an undead warrior with glowing blue eyes and rotting flesh hanging from its bones. It wielded a rusted axe, raising it menacingly as it lurched towards her. "By the gods," Liv breathed, her dagger at the ready. "What horrors have you unleashed in this place?" The draugr attacked with surprising speed, its axe cleaving the air where Liv's head had been a moment before. She ducked and rolled, coming up behind the creature. Her dagger flashed, biting deep into the draugr's decaying flesh, but to her horror, the wound seemed to have no effect. "Right," Liv muttered, dodging another wild swing. "Undead. Time for a new approach." Remembering the old tales, Liv feinted left, then darted right as the draugr lunged. In one fluid motion, she severed its head from its shoulders. The creature's body crumpled, its eerie blue eyes finally going dark. Liv paused only long enough to catch her breath before pressing on. The cries of her child seemed to be growing fainter, spurring her to greater speed. As she entered a large, domed cavern, Liv found herself facing an even more terrifying opponent. A Jotun, a frost giant from the oldest Norse myths, rose from a pool of icy water in the center of the chamber. Its skin was blue-white, covered in intricate patterns of frost, and its eyes gleamed with ancient malice. "Little mortal," it rumbled, its voice shaking loose stones from the ceiling. "You do not belong in this realm of old magic and older gods." Liv stood her ground, her dagger held before her. "I go where my child goes," she declared, "and I'll fight any who stand in my way, be they mortal, giant, or god." The Jotun laughed, a sound like cracking glaciers. "Brave words. Let us see if your actions match them." What followed was a battle unlike any Liv had ever fought. The Jotun commanded ice and frost, sending shards of frozen death hurtling towards her. Liv dodged and weaved, Her enhanced reflexes pushed to their limit. Her dagger, imbued with the magic of the enchanted forest, left steaming wounds in the giant's icy flesh. As the fight wore on, Liv realized she couldn't win through strength alone. Her eyes darted around the cavern, seeking any advantage. That's when she noticed the stalactites hanging from the ceiling directly above the Jotun's head. With a desperate plan forming, Liv allowed the giant to drive her back towards the cavern wall. As she retreated, she sheathed her dagger and drew her bow in one smooth motion. "Giving up so soon?" the Jotun taunted, advancing on her. Liv nocked an arrow, took aim, and let fly, not at the giant, but at the base of the largest stalactite. Her aim was true, and with a thunderous crack, the massive spear of stone broke free from the ceiling. The Jotun looked up just in time to see its doom descending. It let out a roar of rage that was abruptly cut short as the stalactite impaled it, shattering its icy body into 1,000 glittering shards. Breathing heavily, Liv allowed herself only a moment's rest before continuing her pursuit. The sounds of her child were growing stronger again, mixed now with the chanting of cultists. She emerged from the tunnels into a vast cavern, so large that she could barely make out the far walls. In the center, on a raised dais, she could see a group of robed figures gathered around an altar. And on that altar, wailing in fear and confusion, lay her baby. Liv's heart clenched at the sight, but as she prepared to charge forward, she found her path blocked by an intricate pattern carved into the stone floor. Ancient runes glowed with an ominous light, and she could feel the deadly magic emanating from them. "A final test," she muttered, studying the pattern. It was a puzzle, she realized, a complex maze that required the correct path to be traced to deactivate the trap. Liv closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses as she had been taught in the enchanted forest. The magic of the runes sang to her, a discordant melody that made her teeth ache, but within that cacophony, she began to discern a pattern, a hidden harmony. Her eyes snapped open, and with unwavering confidence, she began to trace the path through the maze. The runes flared as she passed over them, some dimming, others brightening. One wrong step would mean instant death, but Liv never hesitated. As she placed her foot on the final rune, the entire pattern flashed brilliantly and then faded away. The path to her child was clear. Liv broke into a run, her fatigue forgotten as she closed the distance to the altar. The cultists, so focused on their dark ritual, didn't notice her approach until it was too late. "Stop!" Liv roared, her voice echoing through the massive cavern. The high priest, a different one from the ritual chamber above, turned in shock. "Impossible!" he gasped. "No one could have survived the trials of the underworld." "You clearly don't know the lengths a mother will go to for her child," Liv snarled, her dagger flashing as she engaged the nearest cultists. Chaos erupted on the dais. Some cultists tried to fight while others attempted to continue the ritual. Liv was a whirlwind of vengeance, her blade finding gaps in robes and flesh with unerring accuracy. But even as she fought, Liv could see the high priest raising a wicked-looking dagger above her child. With a cry of desperation, she hurled her own dagger. It spun through the air, striking the priest's hand and sending his blade clattering to the stone floor. Liv reached the altar and scooped up her baby, cradling him close as she turned to face the remaining cultists. "It's over," she declared, her voice ringing with finality. "Your ritual has failed. Your clan is defeated. Surrender now, or face the consequences." The high priest, clutching his wounded hand, glared at her with a mixture of hatred and fear. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. "The seal is weakening. Our god stirs in his prison. Without the sacrifice, there will be nothing to stop him from breaking free and destroying everything." Liv's eyes narrowed as she processed this information. The threat, it seemed, was far from over, but for now, she had accomplished her goal. Her child was safe in her arms, and she would face whatever came next with the strength and determination that had carried her this far. "Then we'll find another way," she said firmly. "One that doesn't involve sacrificing innocent lives." As if in response to her words, A low rumble shook the cavern. Cracks began to appear in the floor and walls, and a feeling of ancient, malevolent power filled the air. Liv looked down at her son, then back at the terrified cultists. "We need to get out of here," she said, "now." And so, with her child held tightly against her chest, Liv led a ragtag group of former enemies towards what she hoped was safety. Behind them, the underworld began to collapse, and somewhere in the darkness something ancient and terrible stirred from its long slumber. The final battle, Liv realized, was yet to come, but whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them. The cavern shook violently as Liv, her baby clutched tightly to her chest, led the group of surviving cultists towards what she hoped was an exit. Rocks crashed down around them, and the very air seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed through the chamber, stopping them in their tracks. "You dare to defy the will of the gods?" Liv turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows. It was the clan leader she thought she had defeated earlier, but he was changed. Dark energy crackled around him, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. He had been infused with the very power they had sought to unleash. "You're too late," Liv shouted over the rumbling of the cavern. "The ritual has failed. It's over." The clan leader laughed, a sound that sent chills down Liv's spine. "Oh, you naive fool. The ritual hasn't failed. It's only just begun." With inhuman speed, he charged at Liv. She barely had time to thrust her baby into the arms of a nearby cultist before drawing her dagger to parry the leader's attack. The clash of their weapons sent sparks flying, the clan leader's dark magic battling against the enchantments of Liv's blade. "Run!" Liv yelled to the others. "Get to safety!" As the cultists fled, Liv engaged in a deadly dance with the clan leader. His newfound powers made him a formidable opponent, but Liv's skills, honed through her long journey and magical training, allowed her to hold her own. They fought across the crumbling cavern, leaping over chasms that opened in the floor and dodging falling debris. Liv could feel the strain in her muscles, the fatigue of her long ordeal catching up with her. But the thought of her child kept her going, pushing her beyond her limits. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," the clan leader growled as they locked blades. "The old gods are returning. The world as we know it is ending. We could have had a place of power in the new order." Liv pushed him back, her eyes blazing. "And how many innocent lives would that cost? How many children sacrificed? No, I won't let that happen." Their battle led them to a precarious stone bridge spanning a seemingly bottomless chasm. As they fought, Liv caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. The cultist holding her baby was there, dangling the child over the abyss. "Surrender now," the clan leader sneered, "or watch your child fall to his death." Liv froze, her mind racing. She was too far away to reach her baby in time, and any sudden move might cause the cultist to drop him. "Don't do this," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "He's just an innocent child." The clan leader's eyes gleamed with malice. "Innocence is what gives the sacrifice its power. Now, throw down your weapon, or say goodbye to your son." Time seemed to slow as Liv weighed her options. If she surrendered, there was no guarantee they would spare her child. But if she didn't, she risked losing him forever. Just as she was about to lower her dagger, a familiar voice rang out. "Liv, duck." Without hesitation, Liv dropped to the ground. An arrow whistled over her head, striking the cultist holding her baby. The man cried out in pain, stumbling backward and releasing the child. Liv's heart stopped as she saw her baby falling towards the chasm. But before she could even scream, a blur of motion caught her eye. It was Bjorn, the one-eyed mercenary leader, swinging on a rope across the chasm. He snatched the baby out of the air with one arm, landing safely on the other side. "Looks like we got here just in time," Bjorn called out, cradling the now wailing infant. Relief flooded through Liv, quickly replaced by renewed determination. She turned back to the clan leader, who was staring in disbelief at the arrival of the mercenaries. "It's over," Liv declared. "Your followers have abandoned you. Your plans have failed. Surrender now." But the clan leader's face contorted with rage. Never, he roared. Dark energy pulsed around him, growing more intense by the second. If I can't have the power, then I'll destroy everything. Liv realized with horror that he was channeling all the dark magic into himself, becoming a living conduit for the chaotic energies they had sought to unleash. The cavern shook more violently, huge cracks spreading across the walls and ceiling. "Liv!" Bjorn shouted from across the chasm. "This whole place is coming down. We need to get out of here." Liv knew he was right. She could see her child, safe in Bjorn's arms, waiting for her. All she had to do was run, leave the clan leader to his fate, and escape with her son. It was everything she had fought for, everything she had dreamed of for months. But as she looked at the clan leader, now hovering above the ground as dark energy swirled around him, she knew she couldn't leave. If he escaped, if this power was unleashed upon the world, countless innocents would suffer. More children would be torn from their parents, more lives destroyed. In that moment, Liv made the hardest decision of her life. "Bjorn," she called out, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Take my son, get him to safety, raise him to be strong and kind." Bjorn's eye widened in understanding. "Liv, no, you can't." "I have to," she cut him off. "It's the only way to end this, to keep him safe. Tell him his mother loved him more than anything in this world or the next." Before Bjorn could argue further, Liv turned back to the clan leader. The dark magic around him had reached a fever pitch, the very air crackling with power. "You're a fool," he sneered. "You could have had everything, and instead, you choose oblivion." Liv stood tall, her dagger held before her. "No," she said firmly. "I choose to protect my child and every other child who would suffer if you succeeded. I choose to be the mother he deserves." With a battle cry that echoed through the cavern, Liv charged at the clan leader. She poured everything she had into this final assault. All her love, all her rage, all the magic she had gained on her long journey. Her dagger, infused with the power of the enchanted forest, glowed brightly as it met the dark energies surrounding the clan leader. The resulting explosion was cataclysmic. Light and darkness clashed, sending shockwaves through the cavern. Liv felt herself being torn apart and remade, molecule by molecule. She caught one last glimpse of her child, safe in Bjorn's arms as they fled the collapsing chamber before everything went white. When the dust settled, the cavern was silent. Where Liv and the clan leader had stood, there was now only a sphere of swirling energy, a perfect balance of light and dark. The destructive power had been contained, sealed away by Liv's sacrifice. Outside, Bjorn and the mercenaries emerged from the mountain, the baby wailing in confusion and fear. They watched in awe as the peak collapsed in on itself, burying the underground chambers and all the dark secrets they contained. Bjorn looked down at the child in his arms, seeing in his face echoes of the brave woman who had given everything to save him. "Your mother was a hero, little one," he said softly. "And I swear by all the gods, old and new, that her sacrifice won't be in vain. You'll grow up knowing her story, knowing how much she loved you." As the group began their long journey home, the baby quieted, as if somehow understanding the magnitude of what had transpired. And deep within the mountain, in a chamber now sealed for eternity, a sphere of energy pulsed gently, a testament to a mother's love and the power of sacrifice.